Any concerns about the order of business?
That's it.
Self-nation, okay. Item F, public appearances. We have one, Carter Faust. If you'd come up and state your name and address, and speakers have 3 minutes.
I am Carter Faust. I'm a sophomore at Monona Grove High School. I'm at 509 East Lakeview Avenue, Madison, Wisconsin. Earlier this year, the Monona Grove School District blocked the Snapchat app from its public Wi-Fi network in order to conserve bandwidth use. Myself and hundreds like me would disagree with that decision, and after some inspiring words from a teacher of mine, I've decided to speak with the members of this board to try and change it. At MGHS, what's happened since the block is that many students have turned to virtual private network apps, or VPNs, to try and get around the block in order to access Snapchat while they're at school. These VPNs work by hijacking the wireless connection, making rapid demands on the server in order to push through the filter. This high level of wireless requests far outweighs the demands on the server that the Snapchat app itself generates. While it's possible to block VPNs, the server strain required to do so is enormous, and there are tens of thousands of virtual private network apps being produced faster than districts can keep up. Sun Prairie's wireless costs skyrocketed trying to control VPN use, and they still don't have anywhere near a 100% success rate. It's not, blocking Snapchat is not feasible, and it's not the best option. I don't have access to the district's records, so I can't give you an exact number, but students and staff alike have complained about slower internet connections since the block began, which goes against the original intent of the block itself. But if that's not enough to convince you, the matter's not entirely technical. Snapchat promotes school spirit. Last year, students enrolled in MGHS art classes designed and submitted Monona Grove school filters, or images that can be overlaid onto photos and videos, on the Snapchat app. Our AV club would also put up special temporary filters for events and games. I and hundreds of students like me use those filters because we're proud of our school and because we're proud of our district. I should stress that I agree with the fact that cell phone use can be a distraction in class. My incredible choir teacher, Lori Naherniak, has a no phones allowed policy that my classmates and I have no problem with. We trust teachers to make the decisions about electronics usage that they feel are right for their class. What students are concerned about isn't using Snapchat while studying. It's using it at lunch to snap a photo of your lunch to your friends. It's using it at the student section and games to record deafening cheers for Silver Eagle fans to see. It's fun, it promotes school spirit, and it brings people together. I'm honored to have a school board and executive staff that listen to the student body, and I'm honored to represent my classmates here today. I encourage you all to take action on this issue, and I thank you for your time. I yield my time.
Does anybody have any questions?
No, but you want to explain that we can't discuss it really,
Right,
in
yeah.
case you don't know that, because we're not on it.
Yeah,
I just talked with the
Oh, okay, so you
superintendent.
get that, okay. So just so you, I also, I don't want people to walk away insulted if we don't discuss the.
Right.
No, I'm fully aware. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm an amateur, all you're a technician there. How old are you?
I'm 15.
I'm 84. Your generation's ahead of me on what this stuff is. What would the district have to do to satisfy you technically? So I can understand.
Like what action would the district have to take? Basically just remove Snapchat from the list of blacklisted applications and websites on the district's. I believe it's a global filter, or is it just unique to the high school? I'm not sure if anyone.
He's younger and
yeah.
neither.
Take Snapchat off that list, which would prevent those VPNs from having to be used and reduce strain on the network while promoting the community engagement that Snapchat provides.
Okay. Someone knows what to do, right?
Yeah, I think it's the IT department.
I would hope it would, yeah. Can't you just use Facebook like us old people?
Well, they're two completely different apps. My dad reaches out to me on Facebook all the time, and I'm like,
Right.
can't you just text me, Dad? Yeah. No, they're both really
I'm an old
great.
dad, so I get that.
Yeah, they're both really great ways to communicate, but they're just really different purposes, and a lot more people my age are using Snapchat than Facebook at this point.
Have you ever mailed a letter with a postage stamp?
I have mailed dozens and dozens of letters.
Okay, good.
My vocal coach is pushing 90, and we communicate almost always through letters, and it's really cool, actually.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
definitely not a lost skill there.
Good job tonight.
All right. Oh, Carrie, you have a question?
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We haven't
Yeah, I-
blocked letters yet.
I think that Jeff stumbled on the solution. If all the parents and everybody here in this room here started using Snapchat, then the students would no longer want to. Fair enough.
Totally right.
Thank you, thank you.
So, now, I'll just state for the record for the board, I very much look forward to having a conversation with Carter to follow up on this concern, so.
Should I stay to the end?
No, I'll be in touch with you tomorrow.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
All right, next, I'd like approval of the consent agenda.
I'd like to move approval of the consent agenda. Do you need me to list all the things
No,
that were
you
on
don't.
there?
Just say as presented.
As presented, I remember looking at all of them, yep, as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded no, sorry, it's consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item H, recognitions. Dean?
I have a recognition. Susan Manning and I went to the Monona City Council meeting last night, and where the marijuana question was discussed and approved. But I'd like to recognize a Monona Grove High School student, Ben Kimmel, who went there, and probably among the 15-plus speakers that they were there on this marijuana issue, probably gave it the best talk, if not one of the best talks, on that. And the city council ended up ignoring the recommendation of our principal, and as a result, the school district. And Ben Kimmel spoke up very well in behalf. Is that fair?
Is very articulate. You know, again, what he had to say was very powerful.
Okay. Dan, did you have anything under recognitions? Angie does.
I know at our building, Barb Trapp did it. I know at Taylor Prairie, it was another teacher who did it, but at least 2 teachers in our building applied for a MEMIC grant, and were awarded $500 towards Off the Seat Belt and MEMIC grants just this past week. So I'm not sure about the other buildings, but I know our Winnequa got one, and I know Taylor Prairie got one.
Thank you. Susan?
I'm not exactly sure where you put this, but I would like us as a board to recognize Les Nesbitt, who passed on Friday, March 17th. Should be illegal to pass on St. Patrick's Day, especially for Les Nesbitt. But he served on the Monona Grove School Board for 2 terms, and so I just would like to recognize Les.
Thank you. Anything else? Item I, correspondence and announcements.
I have nothing.
Okay, the next item is a report. On J, the special report, which is the enrollment study from Vanderwall and Associates. And we have Dan Eckberg and Mike Slavin.
I don't think I need to give much of an introduction, but Mike and Dan have worked with the district in our long, the long-range study that they completed almost 2 years ago, and have since been working on updating that plan. And tonight they are here to present their findings to the board. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike and Dan.
So as Dan mentioned, I'm Dan, this is Mike, and we are here to present our updated projection study. And the first major takeaway is that our methodology was significantly different this time around in 2 major ways. And this is the first time that there's been a projection of students for the school district that has incorporated both cohort survival methodology along with student projection based on planned residential development. And we'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide. And in addition to that, our methodology for projecting students based on planned residential development was also a lot different this time around, in that we categorized all future housing units into one of 26 detailed housing categories, and then customized rates of students that are likely to come from those types of housing units based on current enrollment in the district. And we did a low and high end projection once more. This is similar to the last round of projections we did a couple years ago. And for the low end projection, we estimate that there will be a net gain of about 440 students within 5 years, district-wide by the 2021-22 school year, including a gain of 71 students at Glacial Drumlin Middle School. And for the high end projection, we estimate almost 600 new students district-wide, with a gain of about 114 at Glacial Drumlin Middle School. And to dig a little bit deeper into our methodology, just 2 months ago, the Applied Population Laboratory at the University of Wisconsin finished their own set of projections for the school district, and those are based almost purely on cohort survival and recent growth rates within the school district. So what we did is we took their numbers and then supplemented them with student projections based on planned residential housing. So, as with last time, we spoke once more with the city of Monona and the town and village of Cottage Grove to get an idea from them about planned residential developments. And then we looked at all the growth plans for the municipalities within the district as well, and developer plans, and that included looking at some long-range growth plans for the city of Madison, which could eventually grow into the western half of the town of Cottage Grove within the district as well. And the vast majority of student growth from new housing within the district is likely to come from the Cottage Grove area within the district. There are predicted to be several hundred new housing units through either redevelopment or infill within the city of Monona, but there aren't very many students at all from those planned units projected, because most of them are multifamily or apartment buildings that are expected to have that many students. And the low and high end projections we did were specifically for Cottage Grove. For Monona, the Department of Administration in Wisconsin has predicted the city of Monona's population and number of housing units to decline substantially for the next several decades. And just within the past 3 years, they've predicted that Monona would lose about 40 to 50 total people. And during that time period, they've been estimated to have gained about 400 total population. So we just kind of ignored the state projections for Monona, and our projections for Monona are based purely on the site-specific redevelopment plans that we learned about from the city and the timing of those, or the potential timing of those plans. And then the high end is, or so the low end for Cottage Grove is based on the DOA's official projections. And then we convert their population projections into housing units based on rates of persons per household and vacancy rates. And then for the high end, we take a hybrid of the DOA's historic or natural increase projections along with historic migration growth for all of Dane County. And within the past few years, the village of Cottage Grove has tracked closer to the low end estimate for the actual DOA projection numbers. The county-wide, Dane County has been tracking a lot higher or closer to the high end projection. So this just gives us kind of a comfortable high and low end range.
So county-wide, growth in the county has accelerated. DOA projected it to go down from 60,000 persons a decade over the last 20 years to 40,000 persons in this decade, and it's actually accelerated. It'll probably hit about 70,000 more people in the county this decade. And a lot of that is due to in-migration. And the pattern we're seeing in the city of Monona, which has accelerated growth despite DOA's projected population loss, is echoed in Dane County figures showing the city of Madison in particular is growing much faster than DOA projected, and its redevelopment. And some of that's happened in the city of Monona and in the school district here. So in that respect, we're reflecting a county-wide pattern.
So basically, what we ended up with is projections of future housing units that we divvied up into 5-year increments for the next 20 years for both a low and high end projection, and then we sort of allocated those out for Cottage Grove, and we'll see a little bit more about that in the next few slides. And then after all of these projections were done, the population labs, cohort survival, and then our residential student projections, we then applied a very moderate decline of persons per household rate. So I think it was a couple students per year per grade, which is based on another historic rate that the DOA releases, and just historic trends for the past 50 years or so nationwide and within the state of Wisconsin. So this chart depicts the main way that our methodology for projecting students based on future housing is a lot different this time around, a lot more detailed. So the last time we did this study, we just sort of used 3 broad categories of future housing: single-family housing, 2-family housing, and multifamily housing. And we said for each future single-family housing unit, we're going to have 1 new student. And for each future two-person housing unit or duplex, we'll have 0.5 students. And for each multifamily unit, we'll have about 0.1. So those were just sort of widely accepted, relatively generic numbers. This time around, I created a database of every single housing unit within the school district and then assigned it one of these 26 housing types or typologies, we're calling them. A few of them weren't actually in the district. We had initially come up with this chart for the city of Madison, and then we were able to use it for this school district as well. And it worked out pretty conveniently in that this first subset, is this cursor? Yeah, here we go, is pretty much applicable for, or not pretty much, it is, we use these rates for the village of Cottage Grove. So we start off with lower density, medium single family, or medium lot single family, small lot single family, duplex, 3 to 4 unit buildings, 9 to 16 unit buildings, and so on, increasing in density. And then we sort of repeat those same categories at a little bit higher density for the city of Monona. So these are our suburban categories, these are our urban categories. And then these mixed use categories at the bottom, there aren't a ton of those in either portion of the school district, but we use those for both. And at the very top is a large lot, unsewered single family, is the town of Cottage Grove rates. So I created this inventory of all existing housing units within the district and then mapped all current students within the district and then linked the 2 together so that we could get rates of how many students are coming from each type of housing unit. So if there's 1,000 single family units in the village of Cottage Grove, medium lot units, and 850 students coming who live in those 1,000 units, then we get a rate of 0.85 students per single family housing unit. So that's where this comes from over here, 0.846. And then predictably, as the density increases, the number of students per household decreases. So, we get a lot more accurate reading this way. So, particularly when we're projecting, future subdivisions in Cottage Grove with hundreds of single-family units, the difference between 1 kid per unit and 0.85 kids per unit can add up. So, it makes a difference. And here is just a peek into a lot of the sources that we use to create this inventory of future housing sites within the district. And over here on the left, we've got that same chart again, except now instead of students per housing unit, we've got our estimated densities in dwelling units per acre for the various typologies. Over here on the right, we have an air photo base, and then there's a bunch of different other layers that we looked at to get both the location of future housing sites, the relative size and density of those housing sites, and then we applied one of our 26 typologies to those sites, and then we tried to rank them in relative order when they were likely to develop. And so here we've got an air photo base. I also superimposed this planned site design from one developer's submittal to the Village of Cottage Grove Plan Commission for a planned future subdivision on the southwest corner of the village. And then I divvied that up into, or I assigned each of the single-family home lots that they had theoretically plotted and assigned them all as Bs, so that matches our B category over here on the left. And then up here they had a planned townhome residential category, so that got a G for 5 to 8 unit multifamily. And over here was just a more generic planned neighborhood, so that's not from a developer, that's from the Village of Cottage Grove's future land use map. And since we didn't have exact unit counts for that, we divvied that up into various housing types that are as described in the planned neighborhood category of their comprehensive plan. So we've got a little strip of duplexes over here, some single family Bs over here, some 3 to 4 unit F lots down here. And then to get housing units from those, we multiplied the acreage by these densities from the table on the left. So then we could get, for every single site in red, so all the sites in red are the future residential sites. We could get housing typology, estimated number of planned housing units, and then going back to the previous slide, a number of students when we multiply them. And so here, district-wide is sort of the composite future land use maps for Monona and for Cottage Grove. And Cottage Grove includes both the village plans, the town plans, and the city of Madison plans, which are seen over here on the west side. But those aren't anticipated to happen anytime soon. And it's important to note that the municipalities can amend these plans, but these plans do control or dictate zoning for the sites. So here, as I mentioned 2 slides ago, we were trying to rank all the future residential sites in relative order when they're going to develop. And so green on this map means it's likely to happen sooner, red means it's further out, yellow is kind of in the middle. So we ranked these sites, to go back to this slide, based on a number of factors, like are they in the urban service area, which is this blue dashed line? Are they annexed into the village, which is the black boundary? Are they adjacent to future or existing development? Are they adjacent to existing utility lines? And so we ranked every site using those criteria, then sent it over to the village, and they re-ranked it based on a few extenuating circumstances, like that one subdivision the developers already submitted a site design for, despite that not being in the urban service area or in the village right now. It's ranked as a 2 because it already has specific plans for its development, and that's right over here, just off the southwest corner of the village. That site we were looking at. And then the town plan residential sites, because they're sort of based on independent variables and not nearly as predictable, they're a lot more based on wishes of the property owner and a developer's ability to get development rights. We just sort of rank those independently in gray so that they're not conforming to the color scheme of the rest of the map that we're looking at here. Oh, and I guess I would also mention that it's important to keep track of these residential plans for each of the municipalities, because tonight, in fact, the town of Cottage Grove is having a plan commission meeting where they're reviewing the possibility of amending their future land use map to include 1 or 2 of these lots over here as possibly residential, which could speed this up from like an 11 in the city of Madison plans to, you know, the next 5 years or 10 years in the town's plans. And further, I just got a surprise email from the city of Monona today with another couple potential redevelopment sites, which aren't likely to impact the numbers very much, like because once again they're primarily large multifamily units. But yeah, I mean the background data for these projections is often in flux. So here we took those sites from the last few maps, and here we have the low end projection on the left and the high end projection on the right. showing when those sites are likely to develop and how many students are likely to come from those sites. And the sites in green are the next 5 years, the sites in yellow are the 5 years after that. And we did all this for the city of Monona as well, but once again, it's because there's so much more residential growth that's likely to generate students in the Cottage Grove half of the district. Tonight, we're just presenting that half for illustrative purposes, but we will have all this for Monona in the final report as well. And here's the next 20 years. So once again, we had the third 5-year increment in orange and the fourth 5-year increment in red. And then this last map is a little overwhelming, but this is if every single planned residential site within or in the community's future land use maps were to develop at the density of residential it's currently planned for, how many students there would be at full build out in decades down the road. And here is a snapshot from the Population Labs report that they released in January, showing the current age structure of the various grades within the school district. So as you can see, right now in 7th and 8th grade, there are very large cohorts. Down in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, they're a little bit smaller, which will come into play in the next slide. So here are our line graphs depicting our projections for the next 10 years for the district as a whole on the left and Glacial Drumlin Middle School on the right. And I mentioned those cohorts in the last slide because you can see despite some plant or gain in students from new residential development over the next couple of years, it's being more than offset for the next 2 years at least in Glacial Drumlin Middle School by just the loss of those large cohorts of 7th and 8th graders graduating up to the high school, and currently the 3rd and 4th graders being a relatively smaller cohort. But eventually that's overcome by both larger cohorts or more average cohorts down the road combined with the planned or expected students from planned residential development. And then these numbers at the bottom are just the same numbers we had in that first slide. And then we did this, as I said, for a full 20 years. The first 10 years were our primary focus, and once we get past 10 years in particular, the numbers get a lot less predictable. But we did them by school and by grade for every school within the district. Well, I shouldn't say, yeah, I guess we rolled in we assumed that every high schooler would be going to Monona High School. We didn't do separate projections for MG21, but we also did them separately so these projections you're looking at, all the numbers you've seen so far, assume a constant rate of open enrollment students. We also did a separate projection isolating resident students in case that's something that the district wants to look at independently. Although at least for the next 5 years, the number of open enrollment students is a little less flexible since there's a lot of kids who are going to stay within the district based on the fact that they're already here. And it's also worth mentioning that for Monona, for the Winnequa total in particular, you'll see there's some decline and then it eventually picks up again. And yeah, the first 5 years of these projections are more accurate because they're based on the cohort survival method from the Population Lab, and particularly in Monona, there is very little new students from planned residential buffeting those numbers. So they're seeing the 5-year increment, they're losing 41 students at Winnequa. That's based on the estimate that right now, I think the 1st grade class at Winnequa is very large, and that's when those students would graduate up to 5th grade or to 6th grade. Over time, though, it moderates out and starts to slightly increase based on long-term birth trends within the district and a slight number of new students from planned residential development. I think that's it.
So in a nutshell, we've updated this. Now we have district-specific rates for each housing type. So as new housing units come on, we'll have much more local, accurate numbers. We've updated this for new residential projects that are definitely coming online and will be showing up in the next 2 years. plus changes, particularly in the plans for the town and the village. And then we've been able, this time around, to incorporate those specific age cohorts from the population lab, which we didn't have when we did the last set of projections. We'd be happy to take any questions you have.
Dean?
I just mentioned quickly too that we also included 4K this time around, which we've not included in the last projections. So it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison if you were to look at the totals for the last number. But sorry, go ahead.
Dean?
Oh, I have a question. If you could put up your map there that shows the Madison annexation.
This one?
Could you put an arrow up there and
Yeah.
show us where the part that has been annexed by the city of Madison?
So none of it has actually been annexed yet. Right here, right now, the city of Madison border is this black line, and then it follows the town boundary and the school district boundary north.
Right.
But these are depicted in the city of Madison's future land use
Where?
plan. This whole section. Actually, I've got a hard copy. If you wanted to see it, I could do it. But
Well, the question is you say it hasn't been annexed by Madison,
no, it's not.
but is it likely to be annexed by Madison?
That is a question that
They certainly have the authority to do that anytime they want to act. do
No,
they not?
that's incorrect. Annexation occurs through property owner wishes. The city cannot unilaterally annex property.
Not even in a town.
Correct. And so what's going to determine if Madison annexes those areas is if the property owners who own that land are willing to wait for the public utilities from the city to get out there. If that happens, those red areas are going to develop at about 10 units an acre on average. In the town, they can develop at 1 unit an acre. So the price of raw land is much higher if you wait. Some people won't be willing to wait. Most land in Dane County sells for a developer for very personal reasons. People pass away, they move out of town, they get divorced, they need to send their kids to college, they want to get out of farming. It's very personal reasons. But once the utilities get there, the value of the property goes up by a factor of 10. And so along that line, I imagine some of those property owners will want 1/10 of the money 20 times faster. And some of the folks will hold out until they can get 10 times the current value.
Give me a sense of what 10 units an acre would be. I'm looking in Monona. I have .95 with 2 senior citizens living there. And that would tell me that there are 10, if this were Madison and they had 10 units per acre, that my lot would have about 9 units.
Yeah, that's not how you
Okay.
get the average.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the current practice using those 26 development formats that we talked about, the average density of a multifamily project now occurring on the edge of the city of Madison is approaching 50 units an acre. Under-building parking and 3 to 5 floors of residential above. You've seen these buildings. Some of them are in Grandview, for example. And you get homes that used to get 3 homes per lot in Madison. Now you tend to get, pardon me, 3 homes per acre, 12,000 square foot lots. Now the average lot in the city of Madison, new lot, is about 7 to 9,000 square feet.
Well, I'm trying to get a sense of the density.
So
If I had an acre in Monona,
Yeah,
that now has 1 or 2 families on it, what you're talking about is that there are gonna be 10 housing units? That
Yeah,
sounds
it's-
like the apartments or
It's
small
not,
apartments.
it's not productive to think of it that way. What you should think of is Grandview, the subdivision on Cottage Grove Road. Overall, that averages about 10 units per developed acre. But there are single-family homes, there's single-family homes on alleys, there are some of these larger apartment buildings where they're getting 80 units an acre. So we're talking about an average, rather than every acre has 10 single-family
Yeah, well,
homes on it.
Okay. but the density is substantially greater in those areas than they would be in other parts of Cottage Grove. Is that true?
Well, Cottage Grove is averaging about 7.5 units an acre in the village. In the town, though, it's about 1 unit per acre because they don't have water and sewer, and it's illegal to put in development at a higher density.
Some of the initial press that came out on this Madison annexation, there were comments by Madison leaders that were not associated directly with that annexation, but they're talking about housing, that lower cost housing development would be more on the periphery of Madison in general, and not in the center of the city.
I can speak to that. We're doing the same kind of study right now for the Madison School District. And we projected over 800 redevelopment sites, for example. It was a very big effort. So Dan was able to apply his finely honed skills relatively quickly to the district here. But we interviewed city officials about the location of affordable housing because we also projected race and we projected free and reduced lunch kids and English language learner kids. And we discovered that Madison has the most dispersed pattern of all 3 of those characteristics, race, income, and English language learners, of any large city in the country. And that's because the city policy now for since World War II has been to disperse low-income housing. And we can think of clusters of low-income housing in Monona or Madison or Middleton, but the overall pattern is the most dispersed in the country. So what I would expect is that the pattern of apartments and the pattern of all those different demographic groups within these red areas, if they were to develop in Madison, would be a mix of all income ranges, a mix of racial groups and English language learners that was more or less reflective of that overall dispersed kind of pattern. So much more diverse, say, than development currently in the village of Cottage Grove, which is a very narrow slice of middle-class America. But compared to parts of Milwaukee, which is the least dispersed city in the country, the most segregated, it looks pretty good and comfortable, I think. So we don't know if those areas will annex. They're probably, I'm going to guesstimate, about 40 years out before the utility network gets to those areas. I imagine some of those property owners, like the one Dan mentioned is on the town agenda tonight, aren't going to be willing to wait, and they're going to try and buy development rights from other rural property owners of the town. That's the system the town is using now. You have to buy the right to develop from your farmer neighbors. And if once you accumulate enough of those rights, the town will probably allow you to subdivide. But that's a very slow process, and in talking to town officials, it's really kept a lid on town development, and the town of Cottage Grove's share of Dane County population is continually shrinking. The town population may be more or less stable, so they are approving new housing units, but as the persons per household go down, the town's population stays the same. So if that continues and the town wants to maintain its rural character, I imagine that a good number of those red properties will be available for development when the utilities ultimately get there.
It might be worth mentioning too that the city of Madison recently completed, just within the past few months, a general neighborhood plan called Yahara Hills, which extends around this area and includes these couple small units which would be potentially in the school district. But that's just it's sort of the second step in the very long process that Mike was describing, that it just estimates a very general desired unit mix for the future neighborhood, and is kind of a guideline for developers when that is going to develop.
I would say all of the red areas on this map are far enough down the road in terms of having access to water and sewer or development rights if they're in the town, that it isn't worth thinking about them right now. And I would tend to look at this two pair of maps here. As we go farther in the future, things are less certain. The green and the yellow ones are definitely coming your way. The village or the town have been talking to actual developers about actual projects in the green and yellow areas.
Carrie?
Thank you. So a couple questions. The way that you're looking at this with your low end and high end still is using the same basic metrics for how many kids per household, right?
No.
Okay.
Well, so what we've discovered is that in the district and throughout the country, the number of kids per household declines by about 0.02% every year. So we have incorporated, we in the office we call it a decay. It's like a radioactive decay. It just keeps happening. And from a year-to-year basis, it doesn't make much of a difference. But in the Madison School District, we have the same exact number of students now as in 1980, but the population of the Madison School District is about 180% of what it was in 1980. So the population of the Madison District has almost doubled, and the enrollment has flat, plus or minus 1,500 kids. So that, over the long run, as we get into those 20-year projections, it's having an effect.
I was trying to wrap my head around that because I took a note when you said earlier the projected decline in persons per household, and I was trying to understand in a major suburban area like Madison how different communities might start to attract more families or families with more kids because of the fabulous schools, and how that might be then different in some communities where it averages the same, but you might say one community versus another would have 3 kids or 4 kids in houses instead of 2, because people who are likely to have more kids are seeking out places with fabulous schools, which is us, and so they'll come here. I'm just thinking about in that way.
So there is a significant variation in the Dane County school districts, but not to that degree.
Okay.
So the Madison School District has the lowest average number of kids per household, and Dan, as I recall, it's about 0.23 kids per household. And McFarland has the highest number of kids per household, which is, as I recall, 0.6.
Because those people can work downtown in Madison, but they still have a smaller school district or whatever. I was trying to wrap my head around why people settle in a particular geographic location and how that affects their productivity of children.
So that's somebody's doctorate degree. But I can tell you this much. It isn't based on the quality of schools.
Okay, that's what I really want to know if our 4th grade strings program is going to push us over the top to the high end projections.
It's predominantly based on a combination of the average cost of single-family housing combined with the proximity to jobs, to middle-class jobs where you can make enough to afford a house. And in the near suburbs of Madison, and remember Madison is exactly the employment center of Dane County with 80,000 jobs between the Isthmus and the university, and Dane County's lucky that way. that McFarland has the closest large supply of housing that younger families with kids can afford. And that's why it's the highest.
Excellent, thank you.
So people don't move into a school district with great schools and start having babies. You think that might be the case, but it isn't really. There's no correlation to the quality of the schools.
I'm fascinated by that, thank you for sharing that.
It's
Okay.
because cost is,
It's really the housing stock that drives.
between cost and jobs, those are stronger overriding factors. Now, in other counties, like Cook County or Milwaukee County, that isn't the case.
Mhm.
And the issue, the fact of the matter is that in Dane County, I don't know if you'll believe this group in particular, but the difference in quality between the school districts are not nearly so great as in almost every other county that has our population.
Yeah, that makes sense though.
So it's more or less a level playing field. And there may actually be more variation between individual schools within a school district than between one school district and another. So that pattern kind of washes out.
And overall, the persons per household is decline, you said.
Slow,
but
very
infinitesimal,
slowly.
but,
And
okay.
there are, the DOA releases specific rates of persons per household decline for each municipality. So we use the specific rates for the town, the village, and the city for these projections.
That's where they messed up in Monona, or no? Their mess
So
up in
that,
Monona was more based on their
actually, I
household
shouldn't,
projection.
yeah, well, so that is still probably true in Monona. So the DOA releases both projections of total population and of persons per household. So their population projections for the citywide were wrong. The projections of persons per household, they've only done in 5-year increments, and we assumed that those were still correct for Monona, which I think is probably borne out by the large number of single family, or the large number of multifamily apartments being built in Monona, because there's going to be population growth from those, but it's going to be a lot smaller households.
So, we could talk about this all night. Let me just show you this chart very briefly. So look at the town of Cottage Grove, which is Group A, up at the top, 0.39 kids per household. Now, normally, homes in the towns have the highest rate of kid production of any single-family units. Duplexes have the highest rate. But the housing, on average, in the town subdivisions, which peaked their development in the 70s and 80s, is right at the right age where a lot of the original owners are still in the towns, but the kids are long gone.
They're empty nesters.
So it's unusually low.
Yep.
The bump that we're seeing in Monona-based kids, the housing age in parts of Monona has now bottomed out and is coming back up in terms of the number of kids per household, because empty nesters are being replaced by families with kids on a whole. And theoretically, we could graph neighborhoods and tell you where the neighborhoods are in that pattern, but that's not cost effective. And it's only a theory. I think it's going to be more productive with your actual enrollment data that is address specific to just keep tabs every other year, every 3 years, every 5 years to see how things are.
And that recent bump in the population of both the city of Monona and in the enrollment of Winnequa will be reflected a little bit, at least in the next few years of projections, through the population labs, cohort survival, and birth rate numbers. So that captures that a little bit. But as Mike said, to do that comprehensively, to try and track that trend, you need to dig up age of housing stock information relative to enrollment records several decades, and then try and chart that out and see where the decline and then the bump up starts to happen.
Yeah, so I think the main point is besides having the updated data, we think we have a methodology combined with your work with the Pop Lab that is cutting edge in terms of being as science-y as possible. It's measurable, it's repeatable, it can be verified. And we think we have a foundation now for into the future. You can update it and really track what's going on.
So,
Yeah.
question.
First, I would say DOA has been mathematically challenged for quite a few years now. But if property value is what drives people moving in there, isn't at least perceived value of the school district have a lot to do with the property value?
But I think the issue in Dane County is there are differences between the school districts and between individual schools. But if I could, every district is getting a minus or a B plus. It's there's not a lot of variation within the county like you would see between Wauwatosa and Milwaukee next door.
Carrie?
I'm just gonna go one more time. One of the things that is super important to me when we were looking at these projections is when are our current schools past their breaking point of capacity? And so the number that I had in my head was, when I looked at the stuff from the Applied Population Lab, that they were saying by 2021 that we would have 1,000 students at Glacial Drumlin Middle School. And so I was super excited to come and see your stuff tonight and see if that was going to jive with your methodology. And so I see your low end and high ends, or bookends around that, looking at that 2021. I happen to have a child who's going to graduate in 2021, so it's easy for me to remember that date. But what I really appreciate about what you're doing and what you just said now, and I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly, is that the methodology used is replicable. Someone else could come at this and do it again and get the same results. So we could be confident talking to our constituents and say, we really think these numbers are for reals, and we are going to need to plan our action accordingly, knowing that this is a very trustworthy projection. And I'm just kind of rehearsing that to make sure that that sounds like an okay thing I could say.
Well, that sounded accurate to me. All the numbers we use now are specific to the district, and in fact to each of the 3 communities. And the variable now is whether or not those developments, those near-term developments happen as we have been told they are going to happen by the folks particularly at Cottage Grove, and then whether those developments sell as fast as the population projections would inform us. So the numbers we gave you are going to be wrong a little bit. We're talking about projected trends based on long-term averages.
Yeah.
And again, monitoring, particularly with Aaron Ruth, the planner at the Village of Cottage Grove, he's the most effective source of overall information about things. But in terms of what we know right now, I think you've got as good a breadth and depth of information as you could possibly have.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. When you get down to, I mean, that's where you get back to these personal decisions when it comes to whether these developments happen in a given year, given time. The developer decides, this is the day to pull the trigger, when the things line, the stars line up, and we've seen some very significant variations in the projections of developments, and that's, I think, where you're going to have trouble with these projections.
So a couple of other things I can tell you. So where your projections are heavily influenced by new development, something like a significant economic downturn can really put a brakes on growth. Dane County is the steadiest growing of any county with more than 100,000 persons in the country, and has been since 1980. It is remarkably steady, and again, that's no guarantee, but it's a track record that is not boom and bust. the way, say, Austin is, or California as a state is. More people moved from California to Wisconsin between 2000 and 2015 than in the other direction for the first time since the 1840s. So overall, in terms of the likelihood of that projection range being broad enough to capture what's actually going to happen, again, we would be more confident here than in any other county in America.
How long have you been using this methodology? What's your
About
track
18 months.
What's your track record with it?
Yeah. So what's different how can I say this? So our methodology that projects the total amount of students, we've been using for about 20 years. What is different now is as new housing developments are proposed in detail, you know, a 4-unit apartment building here, some duplexes here, one of those 50-unit buildings over here. Now we can tell you with much greater accuracy how many students are likely to come from those specific neighborhoods. So I think in terms of site-specific accuracy, our new methodology makes a difference. The other significant upgrade that Dan was able to incorporate is the cohort survival information from the POP lab. We've never been able to have access to that kind of information before. So the changes in our methodology are all, I would characterize as significant improvements in accuracy. But the band of total population for the longer range, we've been using that methodology for quite some time.
I understand the statistical meaning of the phrase cohort survival, but it does sound, when we talk about students, a little bit too much Hunger Games.
Yes, yes.
Which you'd find
Yeah,
disturbing.
actually the population lab uses the term grade progression ratio instead of cohort survival. I just started slipping into my own habit of calling it cohort survival. But it's basically the same thing, yeah. Grade progression sounds a little happier.
Dean?
To go back a bit from your description of township planning and the village type of planning, it would, correct me if I'm misstating or overstating it. It would seem to me that that town planning is much more at the whim, that's maybe a strong word, or unpredictable, rational planning, but much more of larger landowners coming together suddenly. So it's more serendipitous than longitudinal, and it seems like you have a planner in the other area that is coordinating some of this, and not that a town was without that, but it sounds like what I see is very often town planning is waiting for a good site for a supermarket or a hotel, and then it goes up suddenly.
I think that would be...
Would I push this too far?
Well, I think that's accurate. I think it's more accurate to say where you don't have water and sewer, where development is on well and septic. The elements of personal decision-making are more important. Where you do have well and septic, and those are expensive, that infrastructure is expensive upfront cost, the importance of financial factors, interest rates, cost of raw land, whether the utility extension is immediate, next door, or do they have to run it a quarter mile? For development in the city or the village, those financial factors punch at a higher weight class than personal decisions tend to. And in that way, they're more predictable than the personal nature of development in the towns. more predictable in terms of sequence of development, and more predictable in terms of the timing of development.
You put it more properly.
Well, I get paid to think about this.
Carrie?
My friend who's on the Town of Burke Plan Commission was talking about that they had negotiated something, I forget now if she said Madison or Sun Prairie, but like 2050, like quite a ways out, so that it was negotiated and then it wasn't like I'm making this personal decision, but I, you know, can make this decision for the other poor souls who are gonna be here later. So when you gave us the 40 years number, when we were looking at the page and talking about the annexation, and I put 40 years kind of out there, that's just your best guess, there's
Yeah.
nothing necessarily in place, that by that point something will have happened, or, you know, there's like a draft agreement or something like that?
Yeah, so no, not in those areas. So Madison has cut deals with nearby towns to make the towns go extinct, because the towns are so chopped up that it has become very difficult to provide services.
Fire, police, that kind of stuff?
Right,
Okay.
so the snow plowing. So the town of Madison is due to go extinct, I think, in the mid-2020s. And the area generally south of the Beltline will go to Fitchburg, and the area north of the Beltline will go to Madison. The town of Blooming Grove is next,
Yeah.
and I believe it's in the late, like 2027 or so. And all of Blooming Grove that isn't in Madison will go into Madison.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
All of Blooming Grove that isn't already in this, that's still in the town, will be boundary adjusted into the city of Madison as a result of that agreement.
Right, but it doesn't change the school district boundaries.
Correct. And then Burke is the last of the three towns. I think that's in the 2035 or something like
Okay.
that. And the north part goes to DeForest, and the east part goes to Sun Prairie, and the southwest part goes to Madison.
Okay, I had heard a little bit about that and wondered how
But-
that related to this.
But none of those agreements controls development. It only controls where the city boundaries are.
It controls development only in the sense of the water and sewer, which we would be looking at in our school district?
Those
Water and sewer
agreements,
started
those
being in-
agreements only adjust the boundary of the city of Madison, Sun Prairie, and Village of DeForest. It doesn't dictate any particular timing or location of development. It's just about the municipality.
And it is possible that the town of Cottage Grove could strike up an agreement with the village and the city of Madison to do a long-term boundary agreement, and that would be something that would certainly impact future development. But yeah, it doesn't exist yet. But yeah, that would certainly be something to keep tabs on if it were discussed.
Awesome, thank you.
Right, very good. Thank you very much. If you could do me one favor, which is you take your numbers on the last page there and, you know, just send them as an Excel rather than the PDF. Don't expose your algorithms, but
Yeah.
just copy and paste the numbers in.
Okay.
That would be helpful.
This
We
one?
need to keep in mind, if town and Madison change their boundaries, that does not change the responsibility of the school district. We're still the Monona Grove School District, the city school district were abolished in '82.
Yes. And there's
Thank-
portions of the city of Madison that are already in the Sun Prairie School District right now, for example. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
See you all again.
That's
Thank you.
it's the most comprehensive report on enrollment projections I've ever seen.
Great.
All right, where am I? Administrative reports.
Okay, I just have a very short report, but I think, you know, given, you know, it's been pretty widely publicized, the city of Monona, their local ordinance change, and so just wanted to clarify, with our policy changes this past year as well, that our current policy on drug prevention is 5530. It's very similar to what our old policy was, but with the conversion of Neola, we, you know, did use some of their sample language as well, and so in addition to this, of course, all of our student handbooks, you know, make recognition to it, and our students, I think, are well aware, and staff as well, about the prohibition, and so just wanted to bring that to your attention to make it clear exactly what we have in policy, and that to supplement this, as we update code of conducts, those will always reference to this policy as a baseline.
All right, thank you. Susan?
I just wanted to, again, because we had looked at this policy just a little bit when we were just doing the transition. One of the pieces that's been there before and continues to be there, and I just want to clarify too with Dan that I'm getting this right. The board prohibits the use, possession, concealment, or distribution of any drug and any drug paraphernalia at any time on district property. Here's the other piece that sometimes kids forget, or at any district-related event. So if we have a district, just clarifying, Dan, we have a district-related event in the community. So we play soccer
Yep.
in the village or the town, or we play baseball in the city of Monona. This rule applies to our students.
Absolutely, and field trips are commonplace, where, you know, so yeah, anything at all is district sponsored, so, and that is something, you know, yeah, besides having it published in handbooks and so on, it is really important. I am very confident that our students are well aware, you know, of that as well, and unfortunately, when we do have violations, oftentimes it is in that scenario as well, not just at the school, but at, you know, off-site, at school-related functions, so. And then I think the important thing about this policy that I like, that I believe is not in the old one, or some additional emphasis about the prevention. That certainly has always been a really important part about the education piece, and so you'll see by policy, it does dictate that I shall develop guidelines with that prevention, and that's something we're in the process of doing as well, that we'll have in place, you know, to publish for the next school year. So really taking, you know, what we have in practice and making sure that we have it in writing for guidelines. So the prevention is always going to be our responsibility to do what we can with the education, and I think you're aware of the community partnership we have with the Monona and Cottage Grove Cares Group, and as well as what we do within our general curriculum. So it's an ongoing thing that will always be a point of emphasis.
Susan?
And given that one provision is that all parents and students are given a copy of the standards of conduct regarding unlawful possession, use, etc. I know that that's in the student handbook, but in terms of parent, is that, can you refresh my memory? Did they
Yeah.
sign something saying they've seen the handbook?
Correct.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that's
so we
how
make
we
sure,
document.
that's how we,
Okay.
that's anytime we have a mandate to share with parents, it's also through the handbook. Right,
Okay.
and we do make sure that they all get a copy.
That they sign
And
something in
off on
return
it.
if they've
Correct.
seen it, okay.
Yeah. So, I think the other thing, just besides having the actual handbooks, I think in the new format with our policies being through board docs, much more easily searchable, and hopefully as well, then more available to our.
Hugely beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Board reports, starting with MGEF. Gary?
Yes. So the Monona Grove Education Foundation met on March 14th. There's a little question at the beginning whether they'd have quorum, but they eventually did have enough people to kick off their meeting and do their business, and which was good because there were a couple of really exciting things. One of the exciting announcements that I am going to just double check with Dan. I made a note it was public, but I want to make sure is about who they've selected for the nominee for the Monona Grove Education Foundation Gala.
Yes.
Okay, because I thought I can share that. They are going to have the gala next year on November 4th, and the focus of the gala honoree will be MG21 and Rebecca Fox Blair. So it was a really fantastic choice, and lots more will be forthcoming. But they also talked a little bit about the format of that event, and one of the things, just for you all to mark your calendars and to know is coming, will be an evening program at the East Side Club on November 4th. Another item of business that they had was another second very happy item of business was announcing the teacher grants. So the foundation has received a bunch of applications for different projects in the district and selected 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that they are going to fund in this coming year. I have the complete list that I can pass to you. But how they shared it at their business meeting was as a little bit of a chart, and they gave me permission to share that here tonight, so just very briefly. These are the teachers that were the lead applicants. It's Ann Mader from Glacial Drumlin, Carly Jarvie at Glacial Drumlin, Jennifer Fonner at Winnequa, Erin Finley at Glacial Drumlin, and Kylie Ramirez at MD High School. So they're very great projects that you'll be hearing more about in the next few months. And if you come to the gala, you'll be able to hear about past projects that were funded by the foundation. The last thing on the MG, my own notes on this is that they canceled their April meeting. So that made this my last meeting going to for them with our current board cycle. And that kind of caught me by surprise because they were supposed to have an April meeting, but they canceled it during this. So I thought tonight I would just say how much I enjoyed getting to know the people in the MGEF, what a really, really kind and thoughtful group they are. Could not be more dedicated to supporting the district and absolutely giving personally of their time and resources to support our teachers and our educational mission. And really just I can't say enough, really positive experience. And I was honored to have that opportunity to be on the committee, and I'm also glad that I've completed that particular responsibility. So, yeah, so I have turnover notes and stuff for Joyce about the teacher grants, but
You're saying you're not volunteering to do it next year?
you know, I have told many people that I enjoy all these things as learning experiences. But it is a challenge for me to always take that vacation time on Tuesday mornings to go to those meetings.
Susan?
Well, again, I had a question, but one of the things that we had kind of agreed, and maybe we'll do differently in the board reorg, and that is to make sure before you do it another time, is to offer it to someone else who might want to do it. And I appreciate that Carrie's doing that, because it is a really neat experience to see what they're doing. And Carrie, you may not know this, but do you know, so what was the total of grants we gave this year for?
It's possible that they distributed that at some point early in the year, but it would take me a little digging. I don't memorize that off the top of my head.
Just if you talk to John, so have they already picked the grants for this year? That was December 31, right?
Those are the ones I just read.
Okay, and that was
Those 5.
four. And then I was just trying to figure out how many did they give last year, and how many, again, we can ask John to report that out, because sometimes he does come and report. Just that I know, it was my impression that they actually made more at the gala this year than they have in the past. And so I just didn't know whether they were talking about dispensing more grant funding. They haven't decided yet, right? Probably.
But in terms of a committee report, that's all I had.
What I can say is that the amount available was, I believe, slightly higher because, you know, their
Okay.
funds are growing. But, so the ones that were not approved was not because of lack of funds, but because it didn't necessarily match up, you know, with the mission and as far as innovation. I will say as well, though, that some that were submitted that were not approved by the foundation were still very worthwhile requests that I'll be working with the building principals to see if we can fund through our normal, you know, budget process in some cases also.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Good, thank you. Policy committees, Susan?
Okay. Policy committee met on the 16th, and we approved 3 policies that are on the agenda tonight, further down under discussion items for a first read, so I'll just hold off on commenting on them until we get to them. You might remember that when we adopted the policy manual, we had a few policies that weren't included. Some we just were able to roll over, and you guys already approved them. Others still needed some work, and that's what some of these are. The only other 3 that fall into that category, there were some related to field trips, and upon kind of going through those again at our last meeting, we decided that really the essential language from them is covered in our field trip policy with Neola 2340, which has already been approved. However, we have some additional revising we might do at a future meeting for that one. There was one about extended study tours and exchanges that we're rolling into a policy tonight that I'll explain later. So basically, at this point, and the other policy we're still working on is one on student memorials. Our policy for that was woefully out of date. And we're working on some new language for that, so that'll be coming up at the next policy, possibly the next policy meeting as well. And our next meeting is scheduled for, let's see, April 4th. When? 4th? No, that's April.
No, that's
It's a week
election
later.
day. Hold on.
Yeah, somewhere, anyway, it's sometime in April.
Fifth? I think it's the next day.
Yeah, I think it is, it's April
Fifth is-
6th, I think,
sixth.
April 5th or 6th, I think,
Sixth.
yeah. And we'll be, and then we're continuing, you know, I think after this year, the updates from Neola will also be easier, because what happened was, once we approved the whole manual, there was a whole giant equal-size manual of administrative guidelines that Dan had to go through with the Neola rep and is going through with his administrators, and that all has to get approved. In the meantime, we're using, I think, some of the old ones, and so, and that doesn't get approved by us, but I mean, they're still going through that. So the workload is still pretty significant on Dan and the administration's part, and then, because we still have those Neola updates from December that we have not done anything with, now that we are all online, and this format is great, it's so much easier to use, we will be able to start working with those, because then we'll be getting May updates. So, but my point is, once we're on track with all this stuff, it'll be very much easier to just keep up in a timely way, I think. I think that's all.
Now they'll just add policy to the policy committee members. I just found out this past week that as we do the review for the update, you already have access to their big packet. We're also working, you know, Joyce will be able to have that for us already in our format with our policy, so we can work with them very easily. So it's getting better every
It's much
week.
easier,
Yeah.
That's great.
So I'm excited to show you that at the next meeting.
Good. That's all?
All right, good. Personnel committee, Dean?
Yes, I have no handout. Jeff
Moving
just
right along.
mentioned to me he's disappointed that, we met, it was basically a meet and confer session with the teachers regarding salary questions and so forth. The teachers came in with a proposal that, and we discussed the factor, nothing of substance. Dan, I think you would agree there's nothing of substance that was agreed to. We had also talked earlier about some changes in the teacher handbook on certain policies, which I had listed in previous reports, and Dan and Nicole had prepared responses to that, which has been given to them for review and so forth. It was a good meeting in the sense that there was an exchange of ideas and we see the direction and so forth, but we're not near a conclusion of the teacher salary for next year.
All right, any questions? Susan?
Dean, can I ask you, did you, I didn't see it on the agenda, so I'm guessing that you didn't. Have the teachers talked about FMLA at all, family medical leave? The only reason I'm asking is because there is legislation that they're trying to move right now. Not necessarily teachers, but I know the Women's Health Summit is working on that. So nothing was brought.
No.
Okay, just checking.
I mean, there was an issue that remotely related to FMLA was
Just our local sick leave policy.
the sick leave policy, but it
Yeah.
was not directly related
Right.
to your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeff, community engagement.
We met last night. I contacted the people running for superintendent, and neither one had any time between now and the election, which is kind of what I expected, but just thought I'd try. We talked about maybe eventually doing something with our legislators, getting them to do a community meeting with us, or we could get the community more informed than just having them come to our board meeting. We talked about ways to get us more out in the community, and we got some different ideas, so hopefully we can finalize those coming up. And then we talked about adding some community members. We're about 2 or 3 and adding a student member to the group. And in the next meeting, we're gonna put together something where we can advertise for those positions, so.
Okay. Susan?
One of the things, again, when we were doing our day at the Capitol, and I know Carrie and Susan, Jennifer can talk about that, the legislators seemed more than excited. I mean, they said, we'll come, we can come out there, our choice is to come out there during a school day so we can see what you do and we can talk, but have an opportunity to have a discussion. So I appreciate that you guys are working on that. Then we, actually, for a variety of reasons, I have actually been out in the community a lot and received actually one very clear specific request and then 3 others, because I marked them down, for listening sessions at the schools with the board and the superintendent so that they could ask questions. They just had questions about lots of things, like just like the report on the growth in enrollment, and they just like an opportunity to do that. And so yeah, we'll do it. And we'll have 10 people, but they asked for it, so I'm just gonna put that on the agenda. And then is the legislative visits coming through the committee, or was that just?
We haven't taken any.
I thought there were
Well,
2
that's-
scheduled.
Yeah.
We got an email.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was, Carrie,
Which is wonderful that you're doing.
you sent out an email talking about.
I did. I was just making the note of the community interest in listening sessions only as confirming or repeating, I'd say, what Jeff already said, which is the committee's looking at planning that. So that wasn't anything different. Back to the question about our visits. I think it could have easily been me. It could have easily been any of the other people who met with the legislators. But the aide to not Mark Miller, Jimmy Anderson's aide reached out to me after that meeting and asked about following up and doing a visit. So I don't look at that necessarily as a committee function, although it's certainly something that we've talked about in our committee and thought about what are the logistics of that, how do we keep Dan in the loop, how do we make sure the principals are aware, you know, and what precedent has been set for that kind of thing. So it's super useful that Dan has had past experience with running those kind of visits and prepping his admin team. I mean, you know, that kind of thing. But it wasn't so much that as a little committee of 2 people that we were reaching out to the legislators to invite them. It was because we as a group from the school district had been in their offices, and then they followed up with us and said, yes, we'd like to take you up on the offer to come tour. That's how that went.
Susan?
So I guess my question about that, I thought you had mentioned there were a couple dates, and I just wondered if we know
Yes.
those, and then if we're sure that Dan's available on those dates, because I think it is important that the superintendent be available whenever.
I agree,
legislators
absolutely.
come
So
in.
that's kind of how we
And I
talked
also
about
think,
it.
I agree, I'm glad to hear you say that it would be in conjunction with Dan working with the administrators too on what it is about their various schools they'd like to show and talk about and that kind of thing, so are there some tentative dates or not
I have a
really yet?
tentative date later in April, where I know with all legislative things, you wait until the week
Right,
before to confirm
okay,
it and say it's
okay.
happening. Right now, I
Okay.
would consider it as invited, and the principals
Okay.
have a hold on their calendar, but
And then we'll be sure it's a time when Dan can be there.
he's totally
Perfect.
copied on, like it or not, on all the correspondence
Good.
about it.
Okay.
Jennifer?
I have a question about just procedure as regards giving recommendations or suggestions to the community engagement committee. Is it advisable that that's channeled through our superintendent or by attending the meeting itself? So I'm not clear on how, as a board member or community member, I participate in that committee, because I'm not sitting on the committee.
You know, it's, with the committees, it's certainly less formal. And people have participated, you know, gone to the committees in various ways. One is you can bring a subject up right now, where we're having the committee report and, you know,
Okay.
give a little feedback, and then you can get input on other board members. Very commonly is to go to the committee chair with the suggestion, or also, and then if you have something important to discuss with the committee chair, and ask to come to the meeting, and if you want to, and have that discussion about it.
Right.
We are certainly, it's certainly, you know, they're informal, they're flexible.
Okay.
Um,
And,
if it is an issue that is sort of directly related to functioning of the school, something going on functioning of the schools, I certainly have a discussion with the superintendent first, would be encouraged.
Thank you, and.
Depending on the issue.
Right, so for instance, we have a challenge within our district regarding the percentage paid by our employees on healthcare,
Mhm.
which may jeopardize the per pupil dollars coming to our district.
Mhm.
I'm trying to sort out in what ways we can effectively, as a board, help to get that information out into our communities so that more people, whether they're parents of students or not, but simply as taxpayers and residents, have a greater understanding of how we sit in a slightly unique place along with a few other districts. And so when they read the newspaper and hear those amounts, what they don't know is the backstory and the subtleties of what's actually happening with that funding. So I think a piece of what happens for me is that a piece for the greater board to consider, or does that go to a communication committee piece? And it's not something that can take 6 months. For me, this is something that needs to happen very quickly and nimbly and articulately. And so, so I have a question
So-
about where and how that gets handled.
Yeah, if I could, you know, there's
Yep.
several options. If you think it's possible for a committee, bring it up to the committee report.
Okay.
We as a board can then decide whether we want to
Okay.
charge the committee with it and say,
I see.
there you go off on it. You can also bring it under future agenda items. Say need to have this, and then at that time, we as a board can also say, well, charge the committee to do that, or we can say we can take it on as a board. And we do that at any time.
Well, yeah, to that point, and just extrapolating very briefly after that, the Joint Finance Committee schedule is set, and it all takes place in April. All of their meetings are in April.
Right.
So to your point,
Mhm.
something would need to be done quickly if we wanted to encourage members of the public to have input into to legislators. And we do know that that's something that they're going to look at because it's come up, and I don't have any idea what they're gonna do with it. It may be pulled out entirely, it may not be, I don't know. But I think your point is good, and that,
Mhm.
and I appreciate your question of how do we best get something moving quickly when there's something like that.
And I would suggest that the best way to, maybe the best communication, well, the only quick one I can think of is a newspaper
Right.
article.
Right.
And then I think what we could, and then we could as a board, we consider we made a decision, Jeff, perhaps we want to do this, charge the committee with, or the committee chair in this case, because you've been working on articles, with seeing that something appears, gets done that way. Or as a board, we can take that on. Susan? But it's up to us to decide.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate you asking that, Jennifer, because sitting in a meeting Monday night, didn't you share that same thought? I mean, we kind of sat there thinking, so the city of Monona was considering an issue which our high school principal had written a letter in opposition to, supported by our superintendent, and as a board, we hadn't taken a position. And that might have made a difference, I don't know. But, so I have that same question. So we didn't, so that one's over. But there's a timing on an issue right now, which as a board, we could have voted and taken a position specifically on taking away the strings attached, if nothing else, right? So I'm with you. I don't understand. One of the things I thought we did, so just if we can clarify at some point in time, I thought we'd charge the committee to look at that and bring that, like they did, and they did a great job of that, the previous resolution about changing the class size. So it ended up being 3 questions. If in fact I get input specifically from one community that is asking for meetings with the board and the superintendent just to ask questions about school issues, where do I take that? And if I'm sitting there thinking, we definitely have a district legislative issue that the board may or may not want to take a position on, how do we respond to that in a timely way? And then how do we respond to, so let's say I get called as a board member by a legislator who says, I really want to come and visit your school district. So I mean, I would send that to Dan, but should that go to the committee? Maybe we need to get, maybe that's one of the things the committee can talk about is what you want us as board members to do when that happens. I don't know.
Yeah, if I can respond, the current issue, which is this issue with the compensation, is not, as I see it, it's not one in which we have to take a position. It's just a matter of, we have what's going on currently with the way we compensate teachers.
The
and it's-
fact is
hang
we
on a second.
can
Hang on,
take a
yeah, we
position.
can, but the point, I think what Jennifer's asking about, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you want that information out to the public. So there isn't any reason we have to have a resolution before the board to make a decision on it, because there isn't a decision point. It's simply a matter of getting the information out, correct?
That there are often pieces in the news that affect our district that we are not nimbly responding to.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a personal slam at anyone. It's a systemic observation that we do not have the tools currently to effectively, quickly respond and get information out to equip our residents with, if nothing else, with just accurate information. Because the surface information, most of the time in the media, is sufficient for most people consuming right information, but it does not connect to what we have to navigate. So whatever actually our response is going to be, given whatever, right, the current budget will eventually look like, whatever those rules and stipulations, I think it's important for people to understand what the current proposal is, because it is, because that's what we're trying to navigate. And if we don't communicate that, I think that's a disservice, and I think it's a neglect, and I think we need to help people understand what those pieces are. Whatever we decide, however the policy might change between now and October, to help people understand. Yeah, that's it.
I don't
So-
think there's disagreement that it's a good idea to communicate. The question is, how do we do it? And does anybody have a proposal right now about how we, and I think if we take this as an example, on this issue, what do you think
Okay.
we should do? And Dean had his hand up first.
Good.
Well, a month ago, across the table here, I asked Jared if he would come up with the impact of the 12%. And also the other piece I asked him about was that the House of Representatives is also considering to remove the tax deduction, the deduction for health insurance as well. And Jared, because I didn't have a written report, I guess, today, Jared provided that to me and shared that with you too,
Yes.
Jennifer, because we happened to be at the committee. And I should have brought that up at the time of my report, but that would be a good thing, and particularly the 12%, thing, because even if it's a small piece with a short article in it, and communicated to our representatives, that each one of our teachers would have that kind of impact if that goes through, because it's a real impact. The only way. And so whatever salary increase we give to the teachers, if that goes through, is that we're simply making up for that particular factor. But we have he did the research, he handed it to us, and we could be ready to go with one of those pieces or both of them.
And we don't have that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's my fault for not sharing that with you tonight.
All right, so anybody who has a specific proposal about what we should do in this case, raise your hand. Jeff?
I think it's great, and if you have anything, just talk to any of us, because we are very informal. But I don't think, and I haven't put a lot of effort into this, but as a cynical political observer, I don't think this is going to fly. So I think it's premature to put a position out for us. I think it's great to put out information, but I think, I would hate to put out a position and then they change it and then have people be like, oh.
What's your proposal for
My
putting out the
proposal would be,
information?
we just put some, maybe like an article that says what we do now, maybe, because the Herald will print anything we have, right?
Mhm.
So maybe just like an article saying, this is what we did, this is what we do, not.
Could we as a board ask you,
Sure.
communication chair, and you've been putting articles out, to coordinate, getting somebody to write an article,
Right.
clearing it with Dan and Jared, and getting it published, and is everybody okay with that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would see that as something the committee could just do.
Right.
I think also if a board member is sufficiently motivated, I think it's important to check with
Mhm.
Dan and Jared to make sure any numbers are correct and all that kind of stuff, but, can write, take it upon themselves to write an article at any time about any of these various issues. And I'm sitting here thinking, we're not really agendized for this, but when I'm looking at the
We're doing
schedule.
community
Well,
engagement.
in terms of communication, we are in terms of the committee, I don't have a problem with that, but my next part I do. Which is, I had been kind of thinking I would try to testify at one of these, and now I'm looking at the schedule and thinking the next one that I could probably get to is the one on April 7th in Berlin. But it's still not clear to me if I, as legislative liaison, I thought we had said that I could kind of speak with a sense of the board
Mhm.
without having to come back for formal approval, because I don't have anything written and I haven't
Mhm.
had time to think about it, and I won't have time for all of it, but.
We're counting
But I
on
think
you,
it's
Matt.
important to show up at one of these, and that I'm just looking at the list, thinking I'd rather go there than Spooner, for example.
Mhm.
None of them are within.
Well, and they're kind of painful because they're very programmed and they
Right.
don't, you sit there all day and you're lucky if you get called, but it's just kind of, it's an important issue, so it's worth kind of making that effort, I think, so.
But, Carrie?
In response to Jennifer's question and the notes that I was making, just thinking about how to frame this and keep it on agenda as a report from the Community Engagement Committee. So the question of if there's a topic that requires immediate action and we're not sure when the committee's gonna meet or how to get on that, I mean, so the four possible responses that I was thinking of, there is a role for district administration. There are some districts that have a communications coordinator or a marketing person on their admin team. I know that's something that other districts and maybe at some point Dan would have interest in having that here, but in the fact that we don't have that person right now, other people in the district admin team kind of have to craft a statement from time to time and send it out on the campus when there's something that, a dry cleaning incident or whatever, then there's something that happens and someone here writes it, even though you don't have a top communications person to write that. So absolutely have total trust that Dan would figure out how to get that done. If it was something nimble, even if it couldn't go through the committee, I feel like that's a reasonable place to take a communication question or a government relations question about what can we do? Because he might be able to do it on behalf of the district or, that. So it's role of district admin, the role of the legislation liaison aide. Susan, when we were talking in our committee, we said, we're really hoping Susan Fox is gonna testify. I mean, we actually kind of acknowledged, even within our committee, that we had already anointed her with that opportunity if she wanted to do it. I mean,
Well, we
as
did
a board.
kind of have that discussion, but it wasn't clear in my mind how. it was
Yeah,
supposed to
I mean, we were feeling totally confident that because she's got the experience doing it and the knowledge to do it, that we'd be 100%, however she framed it, we would all say, thank you for doing it. It wouldn't be like quibbling with line 2 or something like that, So that's the second possible response. The third one is the committee, and if it's something that does have a lead time, we've been meeting once a month. So if it had the lead time of something broader, yeah, but then we could bat it around there. And then the fourth one was that what Susan started saying, as individual board members, the two things, I mean, you could write a letter yourself. And that was going to be a question that, I've always figured as a citizen, I could still write an op-ed at any point I want to the newspaper on a particular topic. What I'm less clear on is whether I do that just individually. I just sign at Carrie Robbins Cottage Grove. I don't sign at Carrie Robbins Monona Grove School Board, because I think that implies something different. And so, but as an individual, and if you're citing it in such a way people can figure out what your position is, and same with testifying. I mean, I think you can still testify as a citizen if you're, which is different than identifying yourself as testifying on behalf of the board.
What I've done in the past is identify myself as a local board member, but what we had talked about before was being, and other districts have done this, they've enabled their legislative aide to testify on behalf of the board.
Yes.
There is a little bit of a difference there.
Yeah.
With the paper, if you write a guest column or editorial or something, and it could be with your own byline, but frequently you can ask the editor, the editor will just put a note underneath saying that you're speaking for yourself, that you are, it should be noted that you're a member of the Monona Grove. They usually do like to identify you as a member of the board, even if you're speaking for yourself.
Yes,
So,
yeah, and that's exactly right. If you're speaking on a school issue, you should identify yourself in the
Right.
paper as a member of the board, but that
But
you're
not
not speaking
but you're
on
not
behalf
speaking
of
for
the board, unless you are.
Unless you
So-
are, because we voted on it.
That's
or
right,
whatever.
unless you have approved.
So really Jennifer's question was about which is the most nimble, and I thought those went from,
Right.
most nimble, which is just go to Dan, to next, what is the legislative liaison role, which is someone who's already been previously authorized to testify or to write the letter, next the committee, and then last, if there's anything anyone individually wanted to do. Does that kinda make sense?
Sure.
We like treats.
You like-
Very informal, but we do like treats.
You're
There
starting
you
to
go. That's
sound
what
like
you-
the 8th grade girl in my classroom today.
Susan.
Well, I guess again, I really appreciate just giving us some options, but I'm still not sure, I'm still not sure what to do. So for instance, we passed as a board a resolution in relation to the legislation relating to changing the start date of schools. We did that. So that has more power than me as a single person making that same statement or writing letters. So,
Well,
So we did that
never
because.
mind, Peter, I'm speaking. So I'd appreciate Carrie and or Jeff, do you, if we had an issue like this and we thought the 12%, if we could get that pulled off, was important to our district, because that may affect the money that we get, how should we approach that?
The only comment I would make is we were able to do the start date thing because we had months of lead time. We had the January time that we discovered it, the February committee meeting where we batted it around, we brought it back here, then we came back to our committee, Dan very kindly and Joyce drafted the thing, and then we brought it back here for everyone to sign. So there was 6 to 8 weeks of lead time for that particular thing, which made it possible to use the committee as a mechanism to do it, not to mention Dan and Joyce's staff time to produce the thing.
Plus it was WASBA thing, so they had.
Pretty, yeah, that's
This is
different
true.
than.
It was a WASBA issue.
and again, there's a distinction between things that we wanna take a position on and things where we just wanna provide information. And I think in this case, we just wanna provide, the suggestion is we provide information. I'm on board with that. My proposal again is say, Jeff, go make it happen. You know what to do with the right people, and you don't have to write it yourself, saying you have to write it yourself, but get that out there if we believe that's important, but let's do that. And I think that, and I'm charging you as the chair of the committee. I'm not charging, the board would be charging
Point of
you
order.
as the chair of the communications committee.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right now to do that.
We'll get it done.
Any objections?
And I think,
Dan?
Dan, if there's
Dan's
staff
like- Yeah.
support to help write the
Okay,
review.
so I think this is a good example. If this is, there's the budget proposal, okay, the 12% piece of it, that's something that, as a district, certainly that would impact us. And so if we wanna impact the actual budget that's, brought forward by Joint Finance, our opportunity is to go testify at their hearings. So if that's gonna happen, that would be between myself and Susan as the legislative liaison. I'll be in contact with John Forrester from our organization. There'll be superintendents testifying throughout the state. Before I sign up to testify, I'll be talking to John about, okay, who else is testifying on what are you hearing? It would do any good from the superintendent from Monona Grove to come and testify, because our 3 representatives are all on board. They're not the ones we have to convince. Okay, it's Republican representatives from throughout the state. Do they care about someone in Dane County? That's the thing we have to determine. If we think we can have an impact, I'll be glad to testify. Susan as well has done it and be willing to, and we'll work together to decide whether that particular issue or anything else in the budget is worth us addressing. If we think there's any chance at all that we can have an impact, of course, we'll be glad to do that. So I think on the immediacy thing, that would be the point. If you have suggestions or thoughts, please, yeah, talk to me, talk to Susan, or we can discuss it at the, you know, as an entire board as well. But I think that's entirely different than communicating with our
Mhm.
community about
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
you
Yeah, let's
know.
not conflate the two issues.
Yeah.
Right.
But excuse me, I wouldn't call them.
That's right. Thank you, Dean.
Okay.
You can teach an old dog new tricks.
I didn't want to be slapped down.
Dean.
But Dan, you hit it right on the head. Your testimony on that type of thing is one thing. It'd be good to have your board, you know, back that and at least with, without objection or something.
Sure.
But on the other hand, it would also be sometime ahead of time is to get an article in, on that 12% to show how, here we go again. We just had a referendum and now we're having, and one of the things we want to do is attract and retain teachers, and part of that is salary. And here you go, is that you take 12% off of that, and that impacts our ability to attract and retain, or to keep people in the profession. And if that article, you know, every once in a while, you might be able to slip that into the Cap Times or the State Journal type of thing, or the local paper, and you know, and some of those things are picked up and copied, you know, around the state. So it's and to do these things, you have to. The word nimble's been throwing around. It's got to be nimble, and because you got to move it fast.
Susan?
Well, I guess it's occurring to me as I'm listening to this, if somebody's really going to write an article, I'd rather see it framed a little bit more broadly in terms of the strings kind of, I mean, if you're gonna do an article, I'm not talking about testimony now, I'm just talking about if you're gonna do an article to inform, I think the bigger point is the strings that are attached to the $200, the fact that it also goes to each school right now. Not to, so
I'm
I
gonna
guess.
interrupt you for a point of order, because I'm gonna say that when we're talking about the process and what we charge the committee to do, the fact that we're not agendized to talk about this
Right,
is
that's
okay.
probably-
If we start debating the specifics of the issue, which I think we're sort of wandering into,
We are wandering.
that's where I think we run into a problem.
So point well taken, but that's the danger of us. We just assigned though here at this meeting, which wasn't really agendized either, that committee to write an article on that specific topic. So all I'm saying
Right,
is
we
maybe
but
they should read
I think it's
that.
okay for us to give a charge to the
Right.
committee. It's not okay for us to sort of have a back and forth debate about
Well, that's what I
that
was.
issue.
Okay, so excuse me, I was amending the charge of the committee. I was saying, as I think about it, I would prefer that the board charge the committee to write an article in a broader framework that took the whole broader view of the strings attached to the money. Because it's a bigger issue, and the 12% is not the only thing. And I just think it should be, if you're gonna write something to inform and take the time to do it, I would rather see it be a broader thing. So I would amend our charge to the committee. That's my point.
Did you,
We didn't do a motion.
you already understand this? Yeah. Okay, and Susan?
Well, and I want to clarify, it's my impression that, I don't know whether that was directly through the committee or through our recognition of Susan Fox as the legislative liaison, but we've effectively charged her to testify at these hearings. And so it's appropriate to ask any questions now at this point, since we're doing it under the committee umbrella. If you have any questions about how she's gonna testify or how she's gonna cover it, this is
Well-
when.
I think that's a little bit of a stretch. My point was really more to the committee and what we were charging the committee with, which I think is relevant and is fair under this agenda.
Yeah. All right, good. Carrie?
Well, you know, to belabor this.
Yeah, I know.
I get
Lay
that
on
by
it.
the
We
look
got
you
it.
gave me.
This
Well,
horse is dead.
So, almost. There could be a shortcut to take if people are preparing legislative testimony, and by people, of course, I mean Susan and Dan, that then that becomes the basis of the published article. So if you were already writing your remarks, I personally would have no hesitation to say, and by God, let's make that the article then. And so I'm all for not duplicating efforts. So
I've actually done that.
so I was sort of thinking about that as instead of a charge to the committee, and this is not me getting out of it, because what do I care? But instead of a charge to the committee, having it be a charge to our legislative liaison, that as the legislative remarks are prepared, that they also be offered for publication as a letter to the editor. That would be a way to save some trouble. We already kind of know that it would be framed more broadly, because that's the purpose of that kind of testimony. It would be written for a public audience, to Jennifer's point about we're trying to get the word out. So, so that would be a way to do that.
I would, what I'm hearing here, unless it's a major operation that looks like a committee is needed, is that anything that's dealing with the legislative or state government, at least be coordinated through our liaison there, so it's all kind of kept in some order. And I think Susan could say, hey, that looks also like a community committee thing that you could develop or something like that. I mean, I would transmit that 12%. It also has the federal deduction issue on that same thing that he's done as well.
Just one quick question. Maybe what we also want to do is when we agendize the committee report, I'm trying to do this within the agenda. Effectively, what we should do is have the legislative liaison report out at board meetings if there's.
Oh, yeah. It should appear as a board report.
If,
I know, you don't want to do it, but.
well, certainly if the legislative liaison has testified, has gone to an event and testified, it
Exactly
would be
right.
appropriate to give a brief report on that. So,
A lot of these are not timely to wait for a board meeting agenda.
That's
Right, well,
That's
that was
right.
the point.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So
right.
are you okay with me proposing that instead of assigning it to Jeff, you assign it to Susan Cox? I kind of looked at her to see if she was like willing to even
Well,
consider doing
It'll be,
that.
the 7th or later, because.
well, I was gonna say,
It'll be
Jeff
on-
has been working with
that's okay.
getting columns published in the paper.
Sure.
And if Susan wants to write it, that's fine with me.
It won't be before the 7th.
I was just gonna assign it to Jeff to see that it gets done, as a committee chair, to get
Okay.
gets done, and he can coordinate with whoever wants to do it.
I'll talk to you, Jeff.
I know it's a wide issue, but.
I mean, if you need somebody to write it, I'll write it.
No,
But-
but you have 250 words to get it published in a lot of papers.
Yeah, you take out the word "very" every time it appears. I'll give you a
I'm
good
saying,
editor. Yeah.
It's a complex issue for 250 words to get.
Yeah. WASB Day at the Capitol.
I want to thank
Anyone?
Jennifer for this rigorous discussion that we've had.
Is that sincere?
Yes, it is.
Point of order, is that sincere?
It is sincere.
WASB Day at the Capitol.
Did it seem like otherwise?
You don't listen to me at all.
No, you raised a good question.
Anyone want to talk about the WASB Day at the Capitol?
Sure.
Jennifer.
I absolutely enjoyed every minute.
Great.
Yep, I learned, as usual, bucket loads. The panel in the morning was outstanding. The WASB staff, it's a miracle that they coordinate all of us to get to every place on time. It was impressive, it was enjoyable, it was so informative. It was fantastic, it was worth every minute. It was great.
Okay. Susan.
Well, and I would add that for particularly if there are any community members listening, that on board docs is the WASB legislative agenda. That was a lot of what we talked about. You know what else we could post is we could post the agenda that we did that day so they could actually see. So at lunch, we actually were able to hear have a candidate forum for the two individuals who are running for state superintendent. So maybe if we could add that would, if people cared about what we did that day, and then came to workshop at 6 o'clock at night and stayed until 10:30, it would be there.
Let's say they let us know in uncertain terms that they're not going to change the school strategy.
That's true. That,
Susan?
that was one very clear message, and I knew that was coming from the person. I was surprised to hear it come from the other person, but it sounded pretty definitive. The other thing is just the different views of budget. They also were very clear. Speaker Ross talked about his considering the legislature an equal branch of the government. He doesn't feel any obligation to start with the governor's budget. It's just they're going to do whatever they do. Whereas Senator Olson kind of was more interested in working with the governor's budget and possibly making changes, and he did seem to understand the restrictions that were put on us and spoke pretty clearly about that, I think. Yeah, and the other thing that I learned, I think this was through maybe in the Canvas forum, but we're now spending $250 million a year on vouchers, and because of all the referenda that are passing, about 600,000 people are supporting their kids through referenda, or 600,000 kids rather are being supported through referenda operating costs rather than the state paying their dues. So, anyway, it was an interesting day, and clearly there will be a lot of conversation about this budget. So I think you're correct when you said, Jeff, that you think the 12% thing might not even stay. There clearly was not great understanding in the governor's office about that 12% and who was affected by it, and now that they are getting some understanding, there will be some changes, I think. So that was the other piece.
Yeah.
The Speaker of the majority party at the Assembly really thinks that the Act 10 cuts to a teacher's salary offset exactly the cuts to the budget, to our public school budget. So he was pretty certain that that was an equal amount, so.
Great.
That'll work.
All right. Before we move on to action items, does anybody need to take a break?
Yeah.
You need to take a break?
I didn't.
All right, let's take a 5-minute break.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't.
outstanding body of that.
You should testify on that, that's good. That's good point.
I don't know what it costs. It costs gotta be pretty minimal.
I would think so. But it's not minimal. I was talking to my journalist sister, and she said, and that was her first response, is that school
Yeah.
uploaded the local paper.
All right, we'll start again now. We'll get a lot done. No.
Well, these, some of these you can share pretty quick.
Some digital media standards, do it that way, but it's gotta be 90 hours, and it's gotta be in some criteria. I could do this, I don't know, it could be portfolio or something, but, yeah. Drive, smile. Oh, we're sitting at the bus stop. Right, well, that's something.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the, under action items, first one is the police school liaison officer agreement. Dan, you want to talk about
Sure.
this?
So, we reported on this at the last board meeting, that the Village of Cottage Grove has approved a resolution, creating the new resource officer. So tonight we do have actually an agreement. It is almost identical to the agreement that we have had previously with the city of Monona. Obviously, some minor changes to make it, with regard to the Village of Cottage Grove. And we are asking for approval of the agreement tonight.
Susan?
I move approval of the agreement with the Village of Cottage Grove for a school resource officer as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded, discussion? Dean?
Just a question. What are the financial arrangements and cost?
Sure. I'll ask Jared to report on that.
So the funding source that we would take care of the payments would come out of Fund 80, which is outside of Fund 10 or 27, so it won't be affecting our general classroom supply budgets or staffing budgets. That is our current arrangement that we do with the city of Monona. Per the agreements, obviously they have not hired a school resource officer yet, and per the agreement, it's based off their collective bargaining agreement. So what we currently have budgeted is approximately $75,000 is what we do for the city of Monona. But it's also driven by the collective bargaining agreement. So they're not gonna have the exact same collective bargaining agreement that city of Monona, so based on who they eventually hire, years of experience will come into play with that. But obviously, before they would post a position like this, they would want an agreement in place.
Is that, the $75,000 is for the city of Monona? Is that the person's salary, or are there other costs?
So we get bills from them, and they don't break it out by salary benefits, but per the agreement, it
So
states.
basically a contract
Yep,
agreement?
so per the agreement, it says that we pay for their 9 months or a normal school year of salary benefits and any extra overtime or job-related expenditures. Which would be, if they go to football games, that would accrue overtime. If their health insurance, I don't know if their health insurance.
So we're paying basically the officer's regular salary.
Yep, we take full responsibility for the 9 months of the year.
Plus any overtime or other
Right.
associated expenses relative to our services. It's kind of 10/12 or something like that of the salary, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Susan?
Well, and Dan actually answered this question for me, but it was a community question, so I'm gonna ask it out loud so the community can hear that. One of the questions that I received was, will there be any change in the allotment of time that you currently have from the city of Monona SRO?
Right, so his hours would remain the same.
Okay.
So the big difference is now they'll spend 100% of his time servicing our Monona schools. Probably the big winner would be Winnequa School. We'll be able to have more resource time available, as well as, the high school. But that'd be the big one. But to answer your question specifically, the hours would not change.
Thank you very much.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item 2, the employee separation agreements.
I'd like like to move approval of the employee separation agreement as presented.
A second.
Moved and second. Discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item 3, employment contract for Monona Grove High School Associate Principal. Would someone like to move approval for the employment contract for Monona Grove High School Associate Principal as presented? Dean?
I'll move approval for the employment of the high school assistant principal.
Associates.
Associate.
Principal. Excuse me.
Don't change the job description.
Okay.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion?
Dan, for public consumption, could you explain the role and why we need it and that sort of thing?
Absolutely, and as part of our preliminary staffing plan, the proposal was to replace our current dean of students position with an associate principal position. And many of the duties are very similar. The biggest difference in the associate principal position, that it is a certified administrative position, which means that that person, part of the job description, part of the qualifications, is to be licensed and then be able to be part of the supervision evaluation of teachers and involving with supervision of staff. And so that's the major change in this change of position.
So to make, it's necessary for the evaluation and of teachers to assist in that, and that has added qualifications.
It does.
That is needed for that, and there is no new position, administrative position at the high school. This is an elaboration or an upgrade on the current one.
Exactly, and the main reason for that is because of increased student enrollment, increased number of teaching positions, and to have that shared responsibility from our current administrative staff.
Susan?
Well, I'm just gonna add so the community understands, it's to also meet the statutorily required teacher evaluations for every single teacher within a certain time span.
Yeah, so that the state statutes and the responsibility under educator effectiveness, changed about 3 years ago, and much additional added responsibility. Okay. That's a statute.
Not a statute.
Yeah.
Any more discussion? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Discussion items. First reading of revised board policies, 167.5, the use of electronic mail, 1120 and 2370.
Okay, so again, this is the first reading for all of these, and as you'll recall, we brought 0167.5 quite a while ago, and then we kind of put it on hold till we finished up with the manual and decided to bring it back now. And the main reason for bringing it forward for possible revision back then was because Neola had suggested an update, and then we had discussion at the board level. And as we had discussion at the board level, it raised more questions in our minds about things we thought it should include. For example, specific mention of it possibly being in conflict with open meetings law that could result in an inadvertent meeting. So we did read other district policies, primarily Oregon and Stoughton as far as local ones, and kind of put pieces of their language into it to kind of make it more clear. So it was mostly dealing with that to clarify why it's important to be careful about the use of electronic mail. And the other piece that we had talked about is more on the second page of the copy that shows the revisions. It was that's very explaining why it's so important to use the district email for district business, and that if you do use your home email, it's important to forward it so there's an archived record. But also keeping the superintendent informed of issues that arise in the schools and the community, and so we worked out some language there. Also, there was a concern of protecting privacy of people who raise questions, which we feel this now covers. But and not sending an entire, we took out the part about just forwarding the email, but just, in other words, communicating content in a timely way. So you have two versions of it. One shows the red strikeouts, and then because that's hard to read, there's a clean version as well, so you can see what it would look like cleaned up. Does anyone have any questions on that? I guess our thought was this will come to the April 12 meeting for possible discussion and possible approval. as usual, now that we're on these policies, I guess if people want changes, we prefer them to come in the form of amendments if that happens. But any
Dean?
questions?
Just,
Yeah.
hypothetical situation. The constituent sends me an email complaining about this or that and so forth, and
On your personal email or your school?
well, let's say it's, let's
I'm trying to
let's
get-
deal with either one of
Okay,
them,
okay.
but let's say it's it's the district email.
Okay.
They send me one, and they have a complaint
Mhm.
and that sort of some sort, and I consider it something that Dan ought to be able to deal with, and it's, so I forwarded it to Dan. Now, what are the proprietary, is that an appropriate thing to do?
That's totally appropriate, and that's kind of what this recommends. And the only concern that was raised by people was sometimes the person who's complaining to you doesn't want Dan to know their identity. And so if that's the case, you could highlight the content and just send the content, or you could just let him know about it in your own words or something. I mean, the point is to keep him informed.
Well, that's what happened to me,
Right.
because I forwarded the email,
Right.
and there was nothing in the email that suggested to me that I wasn't supposed to
Right.
pass it on or anything like that, but it got passed on, and I think the matter was handled,
Right, okay.
and but nobody thanked me for passing on.
Oh.
Oh, is that all you're looking for?
You know, why did
Thank you,
I?
Dean.
Thank you, Dean.
but-
Yeah.
what?
Thank you, Dean.
We
Thank
just
you.
all
Thank you.
they have a sticker.
Well,
No,
I
that's,
don't-
yeah, that's totally appropriate. And I think that's where we wanted people to be able to use their judgment about where they thought, in terms of a person's identity, but we also wanted to make sure that the superintendent's informed when there are issues that are of concern to, whether it's one constituent or a couple or a staff member or whatever, that we share them. And so that was kind of the gist of it. But using your judgment about whether to just forward the whole thing or whether to just forward the content or whatever. So that was totally fine, in other words. Short answer.
Thank you.
Good work.
Yeah, in general, if it's something about, something in the my opinion, the superintendent's area of responsibility, which is pretty broad, obviously, that he should be kept in the loop and those things be forwarded with him, unless you have a good reason not to, unless there's some specific reason not to. But in general, you should keep the superintendent in the loop on, if you ask me, on any issue that comes to you from a constituent.
Okay, and the next one is simpler.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Which is, I appreciate
Okay.
the update of
Oh.
the email, the use of
Okay.
electronic mail, because it certainly better reflects our usage,
Yeah.
our actual usage, the policy that we had. I think, well, if you follow, it was largely taken from the AG's guide, and if you follow the train on that, it came from a precedent that was 20 years
Yeah.
old. And the only guidance, if you sort of follow back, there's taken from a letter to a school district, and the school district wanted to conduct business by email, and they wanted to know if it's okay if they do that, so long as they read the email out at each board meeting. And that letter morphed into the AG's guide, and that was from 1997. So
Yeah.
it's 20 years out of date, and we didn't have, and I don't think that the AG's guide and our policy reflected everybody's common current use, and this is
Right.
a much better
Yeah.
reflection of that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is too. So the next one was one of those policies that we had carried over, and we realized the whole second paragraph of it was not relevant anymore. And so all we're doing is crossing it out. So the first paragraph reads exactly as our old policy did, just with a new number. That's all that is. And it's not a policy you necessarily need. It's just a general sort of philosophical statement that we decided we kind of wanted to put in. So that's what that one is. And the next one, educational options, this is the one where we took the language. We had a whole policy on international study tours and exchanges, and it's never been used by a student, as far as anybody can recall, where a student, in other words, would spend time abroad and actually try to apply for high school credit for some experience they have. Because our kids, if they tend to go abroad, they either go on these, the school-sponsored trips, or they may do a summer thing on their own, but they tend to do it this summer. While we get exchange students who actually come here and go to classes, that's not typically what our kids do. So we just decided to add this to this educational options, that in the event that a student does do this at some point, arranges some, say, tour or exchange where they think they should earn some credit, they would then approach the high school principal and work it out on an individual basis. So that's, we dispense with our own policy and put in these words instead, so that's all that is. Any questions on these three? So these three will come back on the 12th, I guess, the next meeting for approval, or possible for that.
Okay.
I looked at this and I was glad I didn't have to be on the policy committee working on this, so thank you for that. But I also wanted to say, this was interesting to me, just a little window into the admin team meetings and how prescriptive this used to be with exactly what was gonna be on your agenda, regardless of whether it was relevant or not to what you were supposed to be doing. So my read on this was that it gives you more freedom to set your agendas with your admin team to do the appropriate things and not this list of stuff that you, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was kind of,
I won't-
it was definitely an outdated policy.
Yes, so that's how I read it. I
As
thought
is-
that seems like the
yeah,
right
so-
direction to go, especially given that we have a strategic plan. And there's ways of checking to see if we're getting opportunities for your staff to have input on these various topics. That doesn't
Sure.
mean this.
And just as a side note, that's one of the things that will be an artifact through the
Oh, yeah.
evaluation. So
Right.
you'll see exactly what it looks like.
So I thought this was great. Thank you for doing it.
Good.
We can't vote tonight because we have to see it again.
Right,
Mhm.
yeah, our policy says, we talked about that.
Talked
too,
about
that
policy twice.
We look at them twice in our committee, and then the board looks at them twice. They get a lot of, well, we look at them more than twice in our committee, as you know.
Yeah,
But-
yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, they all get a lot of review. Okay. So that's it for that, I think. Unless-
Yeah.
Yay.
It almost seems like then when they come back, it could be a consent agenda treatment. Like these are the
That'd be
things that,
awesome.
if it went like tonight, where there was no real concern or
Well,
discussion.
Right, but our policy says there has to be a first reading and then approval, so we'll see how that goes, and
If I can
someone
help
wants to make a
expedite
change
that,
at
you
some
let me
point.
know.
Okay, thanks.
No, I think policy is something that
Yeah.
should be its own agenda item.
Right, yeah,
Shouldn't be a
it-
consent.
Right.
No, but I mean, when it comes up, it'll be like, I move to approve this,
Oh, right.
this that we
Yeah.
already
Now that we
discussed
discussed
last
it.
Well, yeah,
time.
certainly,
Sure.
but you wanna have it out there so people have a chance to take a crack at it if they want to.
Yep, that makes sense.
Item 2, board norms. You have a copy of the ones that were approved 2 years ago in front of you. Some board members asked for discussion of this. And we, we're not, we didn't talk about agendizing, approving, changes to these, but certainly if you wanna bring up items you'd like to see put on or taken off or, whatnot, we can talk about that. Carrie?
Thanks for putting this on. I came prepared to ask like more of a guidance from the board.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that appears on this list as our norms is under number 3, facilitate the process of the meeting. There's a couple different points here. One of them is avoid repetition. Another is don't just state an opinion. And another one is statements should be intended to further the discussion of the board. So where I'm wrestling with understanding our board culture compared, or I should say in contrast to what those statements say, is I love the airtime. I'm happy to talk about these issues. I guess I fall into the habit of not all statements I make always further the discussion of the board. And in particular, even tonight, when we have things that we're saying, not because it furthers the discussion of the board, but because we imagine some other audience watching or observing these proceedings without the context, that we feel the need to over elaborate on the context. And in my opinion, someone who doesn't understand it can do their own homework without keeping 9 people hostage while we talk about stuff that all of us already know and that's not furthering the discussion of the board. So I came tonight kind of trying to think about how we want our culture for discussion to be, if we're really serious about these things, or if we just keep going with how we are, which is, and I'm certainly the person who does this, is talking about stuff, whether it always is intended to be concise, avoiding repetition, intended to further the discussion of the board. And so I'm looking for feedback on that or other people's impressions on that, and I would own that I'm capable of changing and reframing my behavior so that I'm not thinking about my adoring TV fans, but thinking about what the other 6 people here need for me to keep our discussion going.
All one of them right now.
I know. What I mean. But I do get emails, and I know other board members do too, that say I watched it online. And I have had multiple emails, so I do know that different people watched it online. But that's really not the point of using our time wisely, nor is it our board norms. So I was coming tonight ready to hear what people thought.
Susan?
Well, you know that, again, I had kind of marked a couple of those things too. Having, and Jean could speak to this as well, one of the things that I sincerely value, I may come in and have a particular thought about a particular issue, and maybe nobody else speaks on it. One of the things is helpful to me is to hear what other people's thoughts are based on their experiences. So for instance, when the city council was meeting the other night on the issue of reducing the marijuana fine, the mayor actually went and asked each of the board members if they had an opinion. And if you look at Roberts, basically what it says is each person has a chance to speak and then the chair speaks. It's just a process and it's just a guidance that they provide, and maybe we don't want to do that. And sometimes when someone else is speaking, you might say, oh, wait a minute, I'm not sure that's what our policy, maybe you feel you have to respond to that, but I truly value the other people's opinion, even if it's, oh, I agree with Carrie, or I agree with Dean, or I agree with what that member just said, not specifically a person. So, I mean, we could, that avoid repetition, I don't know what that means, and I don't know if that's a helpful thing to have on here. And then don't just state an opinion for the sake, well, that's what we're elected to do, is state an opinion. So that's kind of a strange thing to have in there. The one that I marked that, and I don't mean to add more until we finish Carrie's thoughts, is refrain from distracting behavior. And at some point I think we have to address, I know we need the digital devices, I know that we're using them for board work, but I think we have to say that out loud, because I've now received at least 2, probably 3 community responses about how board members are using the digital devices. And I said, generally we use that for board material, and they said, not this time. So if we want a norm on that, fine. If we just want to let it go, fine. I just want to bring it up that the community was concerned about that, particularly in the innovation zone presentation. And I would also just add, somewhere I think it's helpful for us to say that generally we're going to try and follow in our board process statute, policy, and then Roberts, so that, again, sometimes we forget that to look at policy, where policy tells us what we're supposed to do, it's just something that slips our mind. So it's like talking about, just an example, like a closed session issue, and we forget, oh, I didn't know we did that in closed, and yeah, we shouldn't be talking about it here, or yeah, we have to second that, and things like that. So it may be helpful to say, we are following statute, policy, and Roberts in our board process, so that we all agree we're doing that. That's my thoughts.
Susan?
I guess with regard to that point, we actually have a policy that says that, 0161, 0161, which says that where matters of procedure are not covered by statute or board policy specifically, then use most resources. So always statute and policy trump Roberts.
Right.
And there are times when it does, having to adjourn, having to vote on motions, that's all statute and policy. And I know, because I at one point had read Roberts and thought we didn't need motions for adjourn, and you said, no, the general consensus is, no, you do need to have motions for adjourn, that kind of thing. So we do have to remember that, and remember when questions come up to look first at the statute and then at the policy. Some of these, when I look at these, I remember what the board was like when these came up, and I think we did have a situation where people were repeating it. So you can track this back historically to where some of these came from. It's all pretty good advice. It's basically kind of summed up in monitoring your own airtime, not when it says not repeating things, not arguing, and trying to address part of it. And I think to Carrie's point, this is a business meeting, really, and so there should be a minimal amount of talking just for the public to learn something or understand. It's really about us conducting business, and sometimes I think we need to work on remembering that. I also agree with the refraining from the distracting behavior. I think that is an issue. I know at the time, some of us really felt we shouldn't have cell phones out, and because people were inclined to be responding to text messages and all that kind of thing during meetings. And we sort of lost that battle, and now we're doing everything online, which I much appreciate, board docs. But I think when people are texting during meetings, writing emails on Facebook, that kind of stuff, that is not appropriate. And that has been noticed, as Susan said, by some people who watch us. It's also distracting to have that happening at meetings, and so I think I would ask all of us to take that part seriously. A part of being engaged is really being engaged, is being here for the period of a meeting and being engaged in what's going on in the meeting, not texting people who aren't here or sending emails or anything that could wait until after the meeting. So that's something I think we all need a reminder and need to think about and take seriously. I guess that's my main thing. I think otherwise I look at these, it's kind of a lot of norms, but they all make sense.
I mean, I like this statement should be intended for the discussion of the board. I think if we could all keep that in mind when we open our mouths and say, does this move the board forward or not? And examples would be, one of the examples would be going back and forth about what we did in the past versus having discussion about what we should do in the future. Saying we did this, we did that, oh, we did this. That doesn't, unless it's an example that's really relevant in the past, and we're having discussion, for example, oh, we did this, no, I think we did this, no, I think we did that. That doesn't move the board forward. And that's the most recent sort of current example of keeping in mind further discussion of the board. It'd been fine if talking, in the future we should do X, but when we're talking, going back and forth, we did that in the past, those statements didn't further discussion of the board. And I think that comes about up here as being respectful. I mean, to me, the biggest part about being respectful is being respectful of each other's time here, and trying to make most use of it, best use of it. Which is why I think avoid repetition is important. The statement that starts, if you said it once, assume everybody has heard it and understands it, and move on. And then the other thing that I think about that is we all get to decide sort of for ourselves. We're all adults. We all get to decide what it is the information we need and what it is we want to hear. So for me to ask a question of, say, a presenter, because I know the answer, but I want everybody else to hear it, I don't think that that's I should be asking questions that I want to hear the answers to. Not that I think that you need to hear the answer to. You get to make that decision. Harry makes it, Jeff takes the decision with that information he needs to hear. I don't get to make that decision for you. And so I don't think that that's an appropriate for the use of everybody's time to do that. And sometimes we all get into doing that because, that person said it. Dean doesn't agree with me on it, so I'm going to ask him that to make sure, Dean hears that point. And I'm not sure that that's an appropriate use.
I agree with you, just so you know.
Distracting behavior, that's, in terms of electronics and so on, I think when it becomes distracting, if it's distracting somebody else, I think that's when it becomes an issue. That's an important issue. And I would say if somebody's doing something that you find distracting, number one, the respectful way to deal with it is to talk to that person directly. Number two, talk to the chair if it continues to be a problem. And three, if you don't get it resolved, then bring it to the board if necessary. You can raise a point of order. Point of privilege in this case, if you're being distracted by somebody. And that way, we'll minimize the involvement of the board, I think, and maximize the use of everybody's time, but you can get these issues resolved and addressed if you need to have it addressed.
But I think that's a two-sided issue, because it's partly, it's not distracting, it's also about respecting the obligation to be fully engaged in board discussion at all times, except when some of us nod off once in a while, which that might happen, but anyway, that's, yeah. So what were we thinking we wanted to?
Well, I was going to ask if anybody wants to add or subtract any of these, and if so, we can take some notes and bring it back for approval in the future. Susan?
Well, again, valuing opinions. I think if you value
Excuse me.
if you value continuous improvement, then an important part of that process is to understand where you are and often how you got there and how the community felt about how you got there. And the history in this school district is our legacy. This is how we got here. And there are often very significant and important historical points. And you know, actually both Carrie and Jennifer have said that. Oh, that's really interesting, I didn't know that. I do think when it's relevant to the issue, that if a person wants to tell, we did this before and it didn't work, and then look forward, I think that's appropriate. And I don't think any of us should be telling somebody else whether or not to add a point about, because it's historical. And I think that goes against the continuous improvement concept. The other point that's similar to that is, I don't think it's my role to judge why a person asks a question. To me, that's their job, that's what they were elected to do, and that's what they're enabled to do. And if in fact I had 4 questions on a particular thing from the community and I want to ask it out loud, I asked Dan in the hallway, but I want to make sure all the other board members understand it. It's kind of like Dean having some information that we didn't have yet. He's going to give it to us. But the fact is, it doesn't necessarily matter why you ask the question. If it's important to you and you want to ask it, I respect you for that. So I feel differently on those points. And if you want to specifically ask me, I don't think avoid repetition unless that says something to us that we need that. If it does, let's leave it in. Don't just state an opinion for the sake of stating an opinion. I would leave that in because I want to hear your opinion and I care and value it. Refrain from distracting behavior, and maybe we need to add including non-meeting related use of digital equipment except for emergencies, because if you have people at home that might need to be able to text you, you need to keep your phone out there. We already agreed to that. But if in the historically, we have had teachers comment on what board members are doing with their computers at a board meeting that clearly isn't related to board business. So I don't know if we want to take a position on that or not. That's up to the board. That's why we have 7 people, because we have different opinions. But I think, so the 4 things I'm looking at are, do we want to add the language about statute, policy, and Roberts, or do we feel policy already takes care of that, and we're going to respect and understand that we know what that policy is? The speak only when recognized, I think, is critically important, because we all violate but that's part of the chair's role, is to not only do that with us, but do it with themselves. It's part of all of us. It's 7 of us. And airtime, guess what? Roberts gives you 7 minutes, or maybe it's more than that. We shouldn't take that, but it gives you that. And I respect your questions, and I want to leave that in there. So I'm done.
Dean?
I'm glad I'm the only one at the table without any electronic devices.
So it's
I
not
feel
you.
completely innocent of any of
I usually
that.
He's just reading a book.
What? No, gosh, I knew I was completely innocent on that one. I've been in a lot of groups, a lot of meetings, a lot of organizations. I've chaired them. I've been the plebeian member on a lot of them, and I've never found any member of any group as normal and as responsible as I am. And
Same is true here.
And I think we just need to learn that we all grew up with different experiences and different backgrounds, and I ultimately respect the person that I really learned to benefit from has been Jennifer. She sits very silently and she's thinking, and she comes up with. I'm kind of waiting to hear her, and she comes up with some really thoughtful, insightful comments and that sort of thing.
Unlike the rest of us.
Yeah, that's-
No, seriously, no, seriously. What I'm trying to do is outline, and when Carrie speaks, she's got 10 ideas that she's got to get out really fast, and I'm trying to keep up with that rapid fire. And, but every one of us is a little bit different. And I think that we just need to kind of step back a bit and say, we're a board of 7 different people, and we're going to have to try to work together for a common purpose and a common goal. And it's I don't know, I shouldn't have picked on 2 people, but we all have these peculiarities, and I'm grateful I don't have any. That's a joke. But seriously, I think we ought not to be using the norms or any other thing to create a common way of behaving at the table, as long as we're working towards a common goal that I think most people here are.
Could you add respectfully to that sentence, and I'm with you?
Respectfully.
Jennifer?
I think these are valuable conversations to have, no matter the outcome, because as you already know, I believe in process. I very much value when any of us are able to say, I came prepared tonight to discuss, question, approve, affirm. I very much appreciate that lead-in to any topics we have, whether they're in closed session or open session, because it helps me as a fellow board person to know where you're at. So anytime that phrase gets used by any of us, I just want to affirm a positive behavior, because I think it's very, very helpful. I'm learning little by little how to use different phrases to get things going in certain directions. They don't come naturally to me because I'm much more of a collaborator. So I'm getting there. It's a little formal for me, but I'm getting there. So that's just my way of saying I don't quite get all the tools yet, but I'm working on that piece of it. This is a lot of norms, folks. If you walk into any classroom, that is not what the poster looks like. I'm just sharing with you.
This is what happens when it's written by committee.
But 90% of the time it's written by the kids. And they determine what decent behavior and respectful behavior looks like. Right?
And God only had 10.
And they govern themselves. And so there might be a little something here we could learn from the folks that we run the schools for. Just throwing that in there.
My response to that would be, we only have 4 norms, and we have some suggested ways, some bullet points about how you achieve demonstrating mutual respect, or being fully, I mean, the 4, demonstrate mutual respect, be fully engaged and participate, facilitate the process of the meeting, and speak as one board, I think are very good summary of those 4. And then what we did when we talked about, so what does that mean? The problem is, what does being fully engaged and participate, what does that mean? And that's where we sort of added the bullet points. Susan?
And at the time we did this, the Herald Independent wrote an editorial praising us for doing this because they saw that it was needed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a big deal to write these norms because we didn't have any. And when you read these, that's why I was kind of chuckling to myself because I remember what led to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just going to say the same thing, Peter. That it's really 4, and it's kind of thinking about those 4. And can I just say in response to Susan's question about do we want to add one about the statute and policy, Roberts? I don't personally feel the need to do that because we already have it in policy. That's not that.
Let me take a survey, if I may, consensus. Do we like them as is, or do we want to take this opportunity to amend them along the lines Susan suggested, along anybody else, or anybody else has suggestions? Should we go through that? Shall we start that process, or should we leave this by? Carrie?
I could respond to that by one maybe modification of this that I suggest. And it only occurred to me in the conversation tonight. The stark contrast in my mind between coming to a business meeting and going to a board workshop. And so when I looked at this, it doesn't say these are the norms for business meetings. these are our norms, and we have very different purposes of our meetings from time to time. And what I was really in particular struck by is that I'm in the exact opposite camp as Susan Manning when she made the comment earlier about she comes and she wants to hear everyone's opinions. I just completely disagree with that in a business meeting. I'm happy to talk to you outside of this. I don't need to keep professional staff here late while I hear your opinions about different things if they're not directly related to moving the business at hand. And so I guess what my suggestion would be for this is looking at it with the eye of, are these the norms for our business meetings? Are these the norms for our board workshops, closed sessions? Because I didn't have the context that Susan Fox had about where these evolve from. So I always looked at this as guiding our business meetings and what do we need to do when we come in here to get work done together, as a norm for there's going to be something produced. And so I just would feel very differently about a workshop setting and wanting input. Your comment earlier about each person speaking. I mean, that's absolutely wonderful if you're in a workshop format, but if there's a different sensibility coming to a business meeting, that's why I was looking at this a little differently.
Susan?
Can I just say, in response to that, I think the 4 basic norms apply in both situations. And I think part of where this came from, stating your opinion, is we felt at the time, just thinking back, what that referred to was more if you are going to not support something that's on the table, you should have a good explanation and be able to explain it. And we would like to hear it before you vote no and surprise us all. I'm not saying you personally, I'm just saying
Yeah,
in general.
that's interesting.
Or if, by the same token, if you are going to support something, and a lot of our business is routine, like a lot of the stuff we did tonight, you just move second, boom, done. But where we have more controversial things where people might have questions, whether it's approving some of the McKinstry things or staffing or whatever it is, or programs that might come up, there was significant concern when all of a sudden 1 or 2 would just vote no and they never would have explained why. And we felt like out of respect for the board, because it might have made some of us think about something differently too. So that it was put in there as part of being an engaged board member is stepping up and letting people know what you think, and then having the courage to vote. And I also think that when I was going back looking at the statutes about voting, that there really isn't. I mean, it's a required by statute that we vote, and that Joyce has notes on how it went. And if somebody abstains, that needs to be noted in the minutes, according to our policy. So voting is important, and so that's all part of being engaged. And I think some of the times when we kind of laugh and say, well, yeah, 2 people voted on that, and Peter will say, well, yeah, that's okay, because that's all that's required. Well, what that says to me, though, is people aren't kind of staying with the meeting if they're not paying attention to voting. And the opinion thing was a similar kind of thing. It was just sort of an obligation to tell people what you think. That's where that came in.
Mm-hmm.
Susan?
Well, and Carrie, I appreciate your thoughts. Kind of what I see different in this environment is, and I'm on a lot of other boards, and I do a ton of healthcare business. And particularly in physician groups where they expect it to be 42 seconds and then we're done. In this environment, we're elected officials. So part of what I try and bring when I come is not just my thoughts, but thoughts of people that have talked to me about what we're talking about, because we're elected, and I assumed if you hadn't heard from someone, you might want to hear what those other people have to say. So, hey, if you don't want to hear my opinion, then don't elect me. But I'm elected, and my constituents expect me to have a position on something, particularly if I don't understand the issue. If it's very clear and the money's there and we know we need it, that's a whole different thing. So it isn't about me. It's about what the community expects of me, at least right now.
And that, I think, is an important point. For each of us, who we're answerable to is the community, not the community, is the community. And it is our obligation to do what we feel is the right thing in terms of our constituents. That's who we are ultimately responsible for. We're not responsible to each other. We're responsible to the community that elected, to our constituents that elected us, ultimately. And I think it's incumbent on each of us to do, to act in the way that's most appropriate in terms of what you believe is the best way to represent the community. That's the number one, in my mind, that's the number one, number one obligation. And sometimes I'll have to say, if I believe that that conflicts with the norms, I would have to choose to err on the side of representing what I think is the community. The norms are guidelines. They're not bylaws. They're not bylaws. They're guidelines for us to move along and get things done. But Susan said she comes in here with the expectation that she's going to do this to represent the community, and that's exactly right. But your way of representing the community might be different from ours.
That's right. That's
So
right.
we need to respect that. Jeff?
One thing I would say is that I agree that most of the stuff we fly through, but I think there are some things that we need, that are important, that we need to wait till the horse is dead and kick it a few more times. And I want to hear everybody else's things if I don't agree. I'm like, why do you think that? To see if, and I want to make sure, you know.
But you might get in a situation where, we've had this discussion or whatever, and there isn't any, I don't see how adding my 2 cents furthers the discussion.
Well, I mean, that's,
for
again, as you
example.
just said,
Yeah.
that's your own opinion. If you want to do that, that's fine.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, in terms
Yeah,
of
but
what,
you made the argument for or against something, I agree with those arguments. I don't have to
Right.
make those arguments again.
right, but I want to hear why you don't agree with me. Because I know that
And I may or may
if
not
we're
do.
different, then I'll be right. Then I'm going right, right? And as for electronics, how do you know what they're doing is clearly not involved in the meeting? I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're writing down. I don't know what you're on your computer. You have no idea what each other's doing, so I don't know how you can make that call. Who's going to make their judgment call?
Dean?
I just think that we need to understand and tolerate the differences that we bring, our background and experiences, and try to respect that as much as possible. Because we've all grown up and experienced different groups and group norms and backgrounds, and I don't think we can expect everyone to fall into a common set of norms. That's my only problem with norms. It assumes that everybody wants to fit or can fit into it, but we might want to use those as targets that we all can agree to as much as possible.
Oh, sorry, Jennifer.
So Dean, hypothetically, if something is devolving into a personal discussion and argument, am I simply to say point of order, point of preference, point of what, is that what I say? To say like, enough already? What is the most courteous, effective way to do that? Because it's happened. And I would like to know what's acceptable on my part as a board member to get us back on track, get us back to our work, because that's why I come to this table. And I'd really like to figure out a way to invite folks to come on back and do that.
I think we ought to do that, but I think the important thing is the long-term respect that we can develop for what each brings to the table, and not create permanent alienations by perceived personal affronts or behavior that occurs at any one time. And sometimes I think you just have to ignore it or find another way through it, but not have it last to the next meeting and the next meeting and the next meeting. I think that's the destructive aspect.
If I can comment on the point of order. The point of order is specifically related to the rules not being followed.
Or parliamentary rules.
And there's, in our case, it would be Robert's policy or law that guide the meeting. And a point of order is allowed to interrupt. It's the only thing that's allowed to interrupt. Actually, a point of privilege, but that's a little different. But a point of order, so if you see somebody's breaking the rules, the process, raise that. That's what you do. If you believe the discussion is going off track, then raise your hand and get the floor and say, I think discussion is getting off track. I'm hoping we can bring it back to bring it back to this and move forward. It can be a little hard because everybody's got their hand up and you might take a while to get around to you. but, you know, that's life sometimes.
Yeah.
Susan?
Well, and I think along with that, the other comment that can be, and because we do have the norms, even though we don't always look at them, part of why I think it was good to look
Yeah.
at, I mean, as reminding, is you can remind people, let me remind you of the norms, which would say no arguing. Because that was part of the point of when we created this too, and we looked at Roberts and we looked at how boards are supposed to function, and there's not supposed to be, ideally, a lot of back and forth arguing, commenting. It's kind of like when we're on a topic where there's some discussion, you let everyone kind of have their say, and you can talk again. We've never counted how many times people got to talk, how many minutes.
We don't.
I mean, I'm not suggesting we do that, but I think that the idea was that everybody should be able to weigh in, but it's where you get into those one-on-one, two people arguing with each other, that I think it's totally within any of our rights to say, may I remind you of the norms, we need to move this discussion along.
Well,
There's nothing new being
right.
said here, I mean, and try to do it politely, and it's not always easy, but I think that's just kind of using that. And if the tone's getting too heated, same thing, just kind of remind people, bring it down.
The way
And
Robert.
anybody can do that, doesn't have to be a chair. So,
That's right, anyway, what Roberts, you know, for large bodies, the way Roberts deals with that is that you're only allowed to address the chair, you're not allowed to address another member, and that keeps it from getting argumentative. You are making your argument to the chair, which is really just making your argument to the body as a whole, you're not allowed to address, you're not allowed to say, Dean is wrong because you say.
What? I got it.
You don't do that. However, the rules are different for small bodies, where it's more discussion oriented, and that's sort of a necessity. Susan?
Well, and I appreciate, I accept if somebody says to me, Susan, what you should have said was point of order. And I'll show you a perfect example. One night, we were having a discussion, and we were in an open meeting, I think because it was a workshop, and we were in a small room, we just weren't thinking about where we were and that it was open. And there was a question that might have elicited information from closed session. And what I should have said, Jennifer, at that point, when the question was asked, I should have said point of order. But I freaked for a second, shame on me, and said, you can't do that. And then the board member was very upset with me for interrupting them. So I agree with you. I think if we agree and accept that knowledge piece of learning and trying to work on saying point of order, when we have a concern about
The rules. So-
that I think will alleviate
Yeah.
someone feeling that you're interrupted.
Right.
Sorry, I felt very badly when I left, and I thought, I just wasn't thinking fast enough. It was late.
Let me tell say how that process works then. When you say point of order, what you're doing is you're saying we're breaking the rules, the policy of the law, make a brief statement about what the point is. What you're doing at that point is you're asking the chair to make a ruling about whether you are correct or not about whether or not we're breaking the rules. And the chair might say, yeah, okay, Jeff, you need to stop talking about that, or whatever, that's no. If then you don't, ultimately the interpretation of the rules belongs to the body as a whole though, not as the chair. The chair is just the first cut. So if you disagree with the chair's decision, saying, oh, Susan, you're all wet, Jeff can go on. If you think the chair is wrong in that case, then you can appeal that to the board. Okay, and the proper form of the question is, shall the chair's ruling be sustained? Okay, and if the board votes no, then your interpretation of the rules is the one that governs that situation.
You know, one of the
Hopefully we won't
things.
have that. Because usually what's happening is with the rules is that the chair is not following along sufficiently with the rules or hasn't caught the rule violation. And normally when you raise a point of order, it's something obvious. But it's hard to manage discussion and so on and keep track of all of the rules at the same time. So if something happens, please bring it up.
I've been on boards, and when I first came on the board, Susan, you remember we had norms, and at least the first 3 or 4 board meetings I came to was at the end of the meeting, people were asked, were there things at the meeting here that you felt violated the norms? And I thought that created an opportunity
for people to say in calm, dispassionate terms, the, Dean, you interrupted me twice tonight on two different things, and I wish you would have waited for, you know, or whatever the thing might be. And I found that I learned how people were reading me on things like that a lot better than if I was the subject of gossip afterwards, or if you had to appeal to a referee, even it helped me understand how my behavior, which I might have thought was, you know, because I have a feeling I want to jump in all the time. You know, I know that, and you know, so there will be that, but it's got to be said in a way that is not accusative, and it is not probably always the same person each time or something like that. But I thought it worked.
Yeah, and we did that when they were new, and that was, yeah.
Jennifer?
I just want to say thank you for the conversation, and I'd like to make a proposal that we move on from this discussion.
Second.
Is there any objection to that? All right. Future agenda items. Jennifer?
I would like the board to return to its goal process and establish dates and process, please. So we started our goal process and made really good progress, and I'd like us to firm up some dates and times to actually move that forward.
Okay. Susan?
That was also number one on my list. I had completion of board goals, because we haven't even finished the first one, and we're kind of moving on it. So it's going to be difficult to assess it exactly. The other thing is superintendent goals. I'm still really not sure. We haven't written down. Do we want to keep doing that? I don't know, but I'm putting it out there for us. It's, by the way, it's March 22nd today. So, I mean, and then if we have a question about the board voting process in light of the board policy, then let's put that on agenda and let's talk about it so we all are on the same page, rather than, you know, maybe disagreeing with an email or something. It's up to the board. I don't care, but we do have a board policy on it. And
right.
If we want to talk about it, let's just put it on the agenda. If we don't, leave it off.
Okay. We need to move on the goals. Let's see, our next, we talked actually about having a 2-hour workshop at some point, or a special meeting, Dan and I. We just had not gotten to scheduling that because, you know, other things going on. I think our next meeting is a little problematic because I think there's two members out already, which means it's not a good time to set board goals. But yeah, we need to do that and move the process along.
Can I just clarify, were you asking Jennifer for a meeting devoted to that as opposed to, or
You
not?
don't
weren't
care.
specifying?
May I speak frankly?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't understand what our process is. We have had 2 workshop pieces that did move us forward. We left that not making our next step.
Right.
I'm more familiar with you make your next step before you leave that meeting so that you know when you're coming together again. So it's very intentional. So, okay, so we're here at a board meeting. I would like a sense of intention. Because if you don't have intention, things come up. And that is just the way of life. And so I'm asking that this get put back at the top of our list if this is something we're committed to. And I just invite us to make the earliest established date and get back to our process.
Yeah, we just established date. The process is, we at the last meeting, we came up with several of these statements, a couple of these statements. 3 of them, 2 are very, very similar, and then the second one, essentially there's 2 statements. The proposal process, I actually have those in my backpack, and they're a little hard to merge. I was going to merge those into one, then bring it back for us at the next statement at our next meeting, and we can approve or disapprove or wordsmith it as we want to. And then the step after that would be to go through the process again with our second goal. And this is, given that this is probably a 2-hour process, at least.
At
And
least.
I think we should have a meeting scheduled to do that. And the only question is when we want to schedule that meeting. Does that clear up your questions about the
Yes.
process? Okay. Somebody got a hand up over here? No.
The other
Terry.
future agenda item, this was just a question, when we'll hear back about what the related arts staffing adjustments were gonna be in response to adding additional classes at the, whatever schools where they're getting additional class sections? I know the next wave of the staffing plan has the ripple effect on the related arts, and I was just needing to remind myself what date that was gonna be happening.
Okay, well, first of all, the board has not even discussed related arts, that's still the personnel committee.
Okay,
But as far as staffing, we talked about, in April, finalizing that, so we're still working. So I would
Okay.
expect either agenda or report in April.
that'd be great, cause I was looking at those two meetings and just wondering when that was gonna be. And when we get ahead of the recruiting season, if that's gonna be part of what we wanna do for any new positions or whatever.
In terms of a goal-setting session, next week, would next Wednesday work for people? Is that spring break? Whose
Yep.
spring break is it?
Ours.
Is it?
Yep.
Guess who doesn't have kids in school
Right.
anymore?
Right.
What about April 5th?
I can't.
I can't,
You can
April
still
5th.
do it, but I can't.
I can't even go to April 5th.
Peter?
Yes?
With regard to workshops,
Mhm. That's why.
I feel by and large, there's not been enough advanced preparation for them. And it seems to, I would like, I think, I feel kind of workshop to death without a lot of productivity coming from them.
I thought our last workshop was fairly productive
I can't remember what the last one was.
on goals, legislative advocacy goals, and the one before that where we sort of went through that process, I thought those were.
Well, it would.
And I would propose the same process for the next one.
I'll be a team player then.
Can I?
Susan?
Well, so what I did was, because we had been asked to do this before, we had the sheet, and I came in with the written action plan for each of those pieces. So I sat there for 15 minutes with nothing to do. So all I'm saying is, we need to agree on what the preparation is to be, and maybe that needs to be in a memo. All of you should fill out the sheet before you come, or not. But you had told us to do that a month ago, so then we had a very specific thing to do. So I did it. Nobody else did it. I mean, it doesn't matter to me, but I think we knew what we were supposed to do.
Susan?
It was a good
Well,
workshop.
I think to Dean's
did.
point, it's helpful to get an outline of what's gonna happen in a workshop like a week ahead of time or a few days ahead of time at least. And some things that if there are suggestions for things we should think about ahead of time or bring with us or do or whatever, so that we come up with a more clear structure, because I agree, I think that's right. But I think when you just talked about doing, one of the other problems, which I know I've repeated, speaking of not repeating, is doing it in an hour before board meetings. I think that's very problematic to do that kind of work, and so I'm glad to hear you
It
say
depends,
we're
it
gonna do
depends on the work we have to do, but.
You can't do it in an hour.
but
Yeah, and then it becomes very
sometimes we can't. I
disjointed
mean,
and
we had a very successful hour-long
We did
workshop.
2 of them, but we just couldn't finish because it wasn't enough time, so.
I just wanna be clear, just because I can't come on the 5th doesn't mean it couldn't be on the 5th.
Oh, yeah, you're not getting
Feel
out
free.
Sorry.
What is that?
Is-
I will
is-
gladly do
is
whatever
ne-
you decide.
Is next Wednesday an option?
Is what?
Next Wednesday an
No,
option?
that's spring.
No, it's-
Oh, the spring
People
break.
said no, 'cause
See, that's
it's
the
spring
problem,
break.
it's spring break. Open to suggestions. See, this is the problem.
Sometimes we work on a Monday, sometimes it has worked. We've given out
Mondays in
Mondays.
April aren't gonna work for me, except for, I believe, except the 3rd.
I can do the 24th in April. I can't do any dates before
Maybe
that.
have a plan commission, but it's
Just
possible.
because it was spring break, did that mean anyone had a conflict? Or is
Oh,
it
well,
the
I
29th?
didn't, but
I didn't.
I don't know.
Does anybody have a conflict next
I mean,
week?
you mentioned it.
I'm
and-
when?
You don't
I'm
have
not
to be
available.
there
Dan's not
Yeah.
available, but that's okay.
But for goals, you probably.
I would
Yeah.
need to be
You'd
here.
probably be
Yeah.
delighted.
That's right.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Question is Lisa available?
Next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Or a facilitator.
Oh, never mind.
Sorry, we're
Well,
done.
you can,
Well, no, you've been facilitating
no,
the
no.
process, and we haven't taken full advantage of you.
What about
Because
Monday the
just-
17th?
I didn't
I'm
hear that
just
the board
throwing out
members
a
would
date.
come then. I didn't
You
know
can-
that
you can do
the
Mon-
point-
Can't do Mondays, okay.
I can.
I mean, Peter, the point was whether the
Mondays
board
are bad
members
for me.
could come,
Tuesdays are
then
good.
that's a different question than can you find a facilitator for it? And that's, I love Lisa, so that's not like, oh, whoever, we'll get another facilitator. It's not- She's not hearing me say it that way either. I just mean,
Right.
if you're trying to find a date that 7 board members can come, then you find who can staff it.
I would be reluctant to have
Just saying.
somebody else step into that
Well,
process
I'm
in this
reluctant
case.
to.
I guess I'm a little concerned about assuming that it's Lisa's job to facilitate. No, I mean, she
Well,
does do a fabulous job, but it's prevailing upon her
It
in a
is.
way that's not part of her job description. And I think as we
It's-
stretch it out and it becomes more and more time consuming, I just think if we're gonna commit to it, maybe we do bring in somebody. That's
I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
well,
Out of fairness to her.
Or we
I
ask
don't know.
Dan to nominate some of his many, many talented staff and find someone who could do it. I mean, but the question still on the table for me was if you want, to Jennifer's point about getting this done sooner rather than later, and next Wednesday, the 29th, the 7 board members were available, and that was still on the table, I thought.
Jeff?
Not available.
Not
All right,
available.
never mind.
All right.
So what about the 18th of April?
18th of April, we're having our next community engagement.
Mhm. Tuesday.
And I'm not available.
And April the 20th?
I'm still not available, but that doesn't mean you can't proceed without me.
Okay, I'm just trying, April 25th.
I'm available,
Um,
24th, 25th.
We currently
We have a meeting the
personnel
26th,
meeting.
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I can't do Tuesdays.
We have personnel, right?
I thought you couldn't do Mondays.
I can't do I can't do Monday the 17th. I can't do Tuesdays.
How about
Maybe
Monday?
do the 24th.
How about Monday, the 24th?
How about Monday the 24th?
I could probably
I'd
do
probably
Monday.
have a plan commission, but I'll see, sometimes they get canceled for some knowledge.
Monday,
That would,
24th
that
is
would
fine.
preempt my coming here.
That all will be post-surgery for me, so I have no idea what it will be.
When's your surgery? When do you have surgery?
What time?
Yeah,
Point
whatever
of
start time.
clarification, school board meeting on Monday, April 24th, is that gonna be people who are newly elected? Is that gonna
Actually,
be?
the new people are
outgoing
sworn in that
people?
week, so.
That's why I'm
it would-
asking.
It could be new people, right?
Does that
I think they don't
change
get
your-
sworn until the
It's
26th.
No, it's the first, the last, fourth Monday, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
So-
What I would suggest is that let's see, the 4th Monday, they get sworn in on the 4th Monday?
Right. That's
Oh,
what
I-
their
Oh
official
my
is.
gosh.
Oh, it's new board
That'd be
members.
their first
New,
meeting.
yeah.
It will be the new board members.
Okay, so,
okay.
That's all right, this is a
That's
continuous
fine.
process.
Dive right in.
This is a continuous process, it is greater than any of us as individuals.
Okay, so should we just try this again? Let's just
The
play with
24th
it
of
and see
April.
where we're gonna get. Oh, do we have a date?
I think we have the 24th of April.
Who's not available on
24th
the
of April.
24th?
Yeah.
Probably not, but I might be able to. I mean,
You did,
because I do have plan commissions.
you didn't
so-
say no.
Yeah, I did, I said I
Time?
probably have plan commission,
Oh.
but sometimes they get canceled depending on the agenda, and I can't say.
424, a workshop would be evening?
Yeah,
6, 7?
What about May 1st? Let's just add, because
Up way up.
they're the second and fourth Monday, so I know that at least we're.
that's why I wanted to, I don't wanna push, I wanted to do it sooner rather than
I
later.
would too, but
I have a
we haven't-
commitment Monday, May 1st,
Okay.
you do have a conflict?
but the rest of
Yeah,
the week
but
is
you do.
fine.
Are Thursdays terrible, like Thursday, April 20th?
I can't make the 20th,
Oh.
but I
Yeah,
can make the
I asked the
27th.
did I ask
I
the
could do the 20 I could
27th?
do the
What about the
27th.
27th?
I wrote it for Monday, April 24th, are we changing?
There isn't any
So
reason.
Would the
can't be
27th be okay or not?
Yeah,
I thought-
27th
I
would be
thought
fine.
you said,
Yeah,
okay,
so
I thought
far.
you said you could do the 24th.
No,
Alright.
just plan
I said I
commission.
probably can't, but okay.
What about the
Okay.
27th?
27th works for me.
okay.
All right, 27th.
We have a date.
What time?
Is that in lieu of the 24th?
Yes.
Yeah.
I might be able to make it.
All right. What time? Sounds like close enough.
I like the 6:30 to 8:30 because it
6:30
lets
to
you guys
8:30.
have dinner with your families, but it's up to you. You call it.
I come straight here from work, so it's not a dinner thing for
Oh.
me, I don't know.
Would you rather start at 6?
No, but I just don't make an assumption, because that's not true for me in my case.
Whoops.
What time for you?
Just showed up on my calendar. It's 3 days long. 6:30.
So it'll be like all the other ones.
6:30?
6:30.
Let's just try and help.
will we work on all of them, or
I'd rather start
one
at
of them?
5.
I'm hoping to finish one and get the second one, get to this where we did with the first one with the second one.
We've got a dozen of them, are we going to?
We have two. I'm sorry, we only have three.
We have 3.
We only have three.
Would
Only
anyone,
three.
would anyone be available to start at 6 that evening?
I'm fine with six.
Yep, yep.
Yep,
Six.
Sure.
Nope,
Thank
I'll see you
you.
at 6:30-ish.
6:15.
6 is really almost impossible.
All right, let's do 6:30. That's
You
okay.
work at this, right?
All right.
She's obviously
Actually,
not
we
so
sort of
good.
morphed into future meetings.
Are you telling us
Oh,
which,
okay.
which of the norms we're working on?
Are you available on the 27th? Thank you. We appreciate it. You're doing a marvelous job. April 5th, policy meeting, next board meeting is April 12th. Personnel is meeting on the 13th, twice. Community engagement on the 18th. And then after the election is on the, what day is the
You
election?
probably have board
Fourth.
negotiations.
And the
plus-
reorganization meeting is on the
I don't know,
26th.
And the next day is the board workshop.
That's right.
What an exciting meeting.
Yeah.
These guys, we're gonna, if we get anybody new, we're gonna bust them.
We just got through all this trouble.
Move we adjourn, move we adjourn, move we adjourn.
Perfectly knowing we might have a
I make a motion to adjourn.
second.
Yeah, 9 gets.
Adjournment has been moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries, thank you.
Oh my goodness.